Doooovid here. We are live with my friend Joanna Tries, who joined us about a year and a half ago for a Crazy House stream. And she's back to talk about one of her passions other than our mutual interest of chess and Crazy House, which is evolution and science. So, we've been talking for a few years, met on Lee Chess streaming both Crazy House, and we've had a little like uh, private messages and Facebook comment debates about evolution that I've been sharing with her modern day debate and Jennifer's appearances on modern day debate, and so I was encouraging her to debate, maybe even to appear on modern day debate, and that still might happen. But in the meantime, I've invited her to come on my channel to discuss evolution, and we will hash out some of our uh, disagreements. It'll be semi-formal in the sense that we both have opening statements, but then it will be more a friendly discussion than a formal debate. So we'll have a formal introductions to which I've prepared slides, and she has a formal introduction to which she prepared a presentation. Then we'll have open discussion. If anyone in the chat has questions, after a period of time, we'll she's simulcasting on her Twitch, which is in the description. And at some point we'll have closing comments, and then afterwards I'll put the StreamYards link in the chat if anyone wants to come on and add to the discussions. And hopefully Joanna will have maybe at least an hour and hour and a half to join if the conversation is interesting. Maybe she'll stick around more if you want to add your input. So first I'll hand it over to Joanna to introduce herself and her background and relationship to the topic of evolution.
Sure, thank you. Okay, yeah, I wrote a little introduction for this. I have a couple to choose from. I wasn't sure if I should use my chess profile or not. So I had to copy that. Anyways, my name is Joanna. I am a professional researcher and freelance writer. I specialize in science, nutrition, and wellness. The majority of my formal education was geared towards biomedical engineering. 4 years in, my mom unexpectedly died. This is relevant. I'm not trying to gain sympathy in the beginning. But I needed a distraction, and I didn't have the money to buy quilting material, so I ended up writing. It's free. I wrote my first book, and I fell completely in love with it. I changed all of um, my course goals and structure to pursue writing. Today, biology remains a career focus and central passion of mine. I've been writing science content for children's learning programs and ghostwriting for medical professionals for the past decade. And it's definitely something that keeps me learning, and I love it. That's what I have. Thank you. As for how I feel about evolution, you want me to get into that? Slides, or how would you, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, just that should be sufficient. Just
Okay.
if you have a background into why you thought evolution, besides for your presentation that will formally be on evolution, but why you find evolution interesting and wanted to put yourself out there to discuss it and possibly enter the live streaming debate arenas on the topic of evolution.
Yeah. Well, so evolution, biology is a big passion of mine. I've always been fascinated with living organisms, how they function, how they work in this world, and how we can use that information to make our lives easier, better, healthier. Right? It's amazing information. And if you look at biology in any way, evolution is the complete backbone to that biological science. I mean, you can't open a biology book without the majority of it being regarding evolution. So they go hand in hand.
Okay, and that's somewhat the same reason why I choose to focus on arguing against evolution, because I think within proposing a spiritual framework, because evolution is the backbone of science, evolutionary science, biology, medicine, that it's important to defend a spiritual outlook. So that's one of the reasons I focus on arguing against evolution, because not necessarily that I'm a hater on evolution, but because I have a spiritual outlook, and I think one of the largest reasons people tend to reject a spiritual outlook is the theory of evolution. So with that, I have prepared a presentation. So I've
Okay.
actually shown this on Week in Review. You went over kind of publicly, so looks like it's going. So prepared. I mean, it's kind of friendly conversation, but for like a debate style, prepared a PowerPoint to express my main points, and even a nice collage to advertise the event. Although unfortunately, Joanna wasn't 100% sure about her schedule, so I only posted it today. Well, I posted the stream like a week ago. So with that, here's my outline for the main points. So the main point I want to stress in this is the science and structure of evolution, and I would say the problems with it. I put more on the level of uncertainty. So people listen to me regularly know I have what I call the multiple truth hypothesis, that has somewhat like a Kantian epistemology, where we can't really know the truth. We could only have a feeling of what may be more or less true. And so, in that sense, I'm not claiming that evolution is false or that there's some other theory that is false or true. I just want to put in perspective um, the level of uncertainty, and how much yet there is for evolution to explain, and the possibility that evolution you may never be able to explain these things. So, within that, just a little refresher on the scientific method, and the history of science, philosophy of science, and where evolution fits in that. And from there, I call the problem of chemistry. You'll say that physics is the golden mean of science in general. So chemistry is like a softer science in that sense, that generally it reduces the physics, and chemistry talks about atomic matter, and and then biology as a scientific subject is largely reduced or dependent upon chemistry. In the main, historical, going back to Aristotle, to ancient times, we call theology or vitalism, where we understand usually biology, that things have function, that like different systems and elements in the cell or biological life serves a function. And why is that problematic from a scientific view to understand biological units as having a function? And then evolution, to say what exactly is evolution, and why is it problematic as a scientific theory? Is it unfalsifiable? And then, one of my first entrances into YouTube debates was arguing with Jean-Francois Greppi on evolution, and I focused mostly on consciousness and the inability of material neuroscience to properly explain consciousness. And if biology materialism can't explain consciousness, how could evolution explain consciousness? And then, is that a weak point in the theory of evolution, the fact that consciousness is so difficult to explain from a materialistic aspects? And I threw in some of the general complaints for people who debate regularly about evolution. There's hundreds of points in like modern day debates. You see a lot of things on like fossil records and various things, but just a little bit on abiogenesis, probability information theory, irreducible complexity, entropy, and depending on the schedule or what points Joanna makes, maybe we'll talk more or less about these various topics. And then a point of the origins of ethics and morality, the problem of evil and suffering, and nihilism. How is it possible to derive a moral, ethical view from evolutionary framework? So, precursor to the scientific method, people have been watching my streams on the history of the philosophy of science or Week in Review. Science largely arises from Galileo, Descartes, and Newton within physics and celestial mechanics and the laws of motion, specifically from the Cartesian Galilean understanding. Science and the scientific method is mathematical descriptions of universal physical laws. Although at the same time you have Harvey and the idea that the heart pumps blood, and so physics is coming to overturn Aristotelian physics, medicine also starts to overturn Aristotelian biology and Galen's anatomy. However, the scientific method was almost unique to the laws of physics. We think of science that make exact predictions through equations, where you have in physics masses acting in space over time. Most notably the history of celestial mechanics, where you have something that could be considered a mass that is in a certain place in space, and you could predict where it's going to be in the future with precision that was later standardized through differential equations and calculus that would be able to describe the past, future states, uh, that could be independently tested and verified. And there's levels of models in things like social science, economics, history that have predictability. But physics is the gold standard of science because of the level of mathematical predictions that could be independently tested and verified. And that's the long history between science, engineering, and technology that covered in some of my streams about like the steam engine and thermodynamics through the unification under the conservation of energy in the late 1800s. So in that sense, physics is really the only pure science, although science is a loose term. And these days, science is meant to include biology and medicine. But when we talk about a scientific theory, we'll see that evolution is not on the same par standard as physics theories. And then with that, the problem of chemistry, that chemistry theoretically has a reduction to physics, that physics itself is philosophically, theologically problematic, and that you have independent objects acting within empty space over time. So there's still debate today over what does it mean to have independent objects acting in space over time. But from that, despite philosophical difficulties with defining objects, forces acting at distances, empty space and time, mechanical physics was successful, providing predictive equations and relationships between observable and measurable phenomenon. Chemistry, which focuses on molecules and atomic structures acting within the law of averages. So we talk about an object within physics, like a human, a celestial object, something, an engineering device. When we talk about atomic chemical structures, you have Avogadro's number 10 to the negative 23, and molecules that we don't really study or interact with individual molecules. We look at laws of averages, statistical methods, and things are constantly uh, morphing and changing from one object to the other. And although chemistry does provide models and laws that make predictions with mathematical formulas, the objects are not precise, but fluid changing only with statistical laws and averages. So I would say it's less than physics, and most of the credibility of chemistry is its ability to be reduced to physics. The problem biology. Teleology is the Greek understanding from Aristotelian biology of the purpose, the function, and purpose in biological structures, like in Galen, historical medicine, in biology. Certain things are obvious things in the body serve a different function, like the chart on the right, the immune system, the digestive system, the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, the muscular system, reproductive system, so on and so on. That it's obvious when you look at various aspects, in the cell biology, that the various parts serve a function, and that is, historically was referred to vitalism. That was believed that there was a dualistic system where the purpose was not driven from the physical form, but was from some vital spirit, so to say, the soul. So to say that the human body has a purpose. When you look in physics and you do measurements of physical bodies or inorganic chemistry or molecular uh, studies, we don't assume that they have a purpose. However, within biology, we assume that biological organisms as a whole or their parts have a function, structures and substructures, each with specific function. So the problem of the whole parts, the origin of function, units operating together with common purpose. So the question is, where does the purpose within biology arise? And the point on
Increasing
science,
survivability. Sorry. That's right. That's the purpose.
Yeah, well, you say there are multiple purposes, but even to say that
That's the
that
bottom line purpose for all of it. Is it increases survivability, so those genes were passed on, and that's why that trait exists in a current population.
yeah, so that's we'll get to my point in the next slide on evolution, but I say this is a problem within evolution in general. So just mention the most scientific part in terms of like the physical laws is that biology tries to function within the conservation of energy. And so like metabolism, the Krebs cycles, photosynthesis, where you assume that energy is conserved. And actually, when Helmholtz, in the late 1800s, by covering Week in Review a few weeks ago, in the history of um, the conservation of energy, questioned whether the conservation of energy would apply to metabolism and bodily functions. And at that point, it wasn't clear. Molecular biology doesn't arise until the 1950s. And only certain aspects of biology would be scientific in the center that you could reduce the equations, and the equations would be subject to the law of conservation of energy. So this question, where does function derive from? So most people today talk about like the emergence and that function emerges. So even if you talk like a protein, you have the atomism, you have atoms and they form molecules, and the molecules form a protein, and then this protein, so to say, serves a function. So where does that function arise from? So this isn't even yet on evolution. This is just a question of biology. So you could give a spiritual, a theology, a vitalistic purpose, and say that biological structures need some form of spirit to give it that function. And then if you have these, the most modern experts in biology talk about this idea of emergence, that the function emerges from the form, although emergence is not really a scientific concept. It arises from mathematics and philosophy, and that's Jennifer Church Ventropy's common term, metaphysical parsimony. That if you're going to claim that just the simplest explanation, you're going to claim that the function emerges from the form. What's the difference between that and dualism? And is it more simple to claim that that function emerges from form, or that the function is derivative from some sort of spiritual element? And genetics, so to say, is based on information theory. So the modern genetic function, even to say that we know these days we have DNA, and DNA. Um, Here I have Francis Crick and the central dogma that DNA codes on RNA and RNA codes for protein. And the idea is that information is contained in the DNA, and the information codes for function. But it's saying this is derivative from information theory, which I'll get back to in a second. And actually, molecular biology was coined by the Rockefeller Foundation Weaver, who is known for the Shannon-Weaver theory of information theory. So that the concept of genetic information did not actually derive from biology; it derived from the independent theory of information theory, and it was just speculated that information, and so there'll be a topic we get more into. So the problem of evolution, the Madan-Bailey fallacy, natural selection, and evolution. Basically saying there's elements. Evolution is a vague umbrella term that includes many biological theories or other theories that is put together, that independently each theory could be called scientific, that's predictive and explanatory, although very rarely are even the scientific parts of evolution mathematically or precise as physics is. But evolution requires like you're really probably like 20 different various theories molded together. So often when people argue in favor of evolution, they'll talk about certain aspects.
Doesn't gravity though? I mean, how many physical properties are we talking about when you're considering gravity? But we don't question gravity when you're doing your everyday, because it doesn't inherently mess up your original ideology, correct?
Well, I would say gravity only necessitates the concept of
We,
independent masses moving in space
no, there's lots of
over
no.
time.
There's so many intricacies and terms that fit in the same way into gravity, the theory of gravity, right? As the terms natural selection, mutation, those terms fit and you're used to describe and encompass the theory of evolution. Just as, I mean, we could go into all of these crazy terms that you could, I guess, categorize into a different theory, but it's not. It's terminology and information categorized and labeled in a certain way that explains the theory in a whole. It's not, they're not separate theories.
Well, gravity, although it has precursor knowledge, is actually a very simplified mathematical formula. So, like
It's not simple.
well,
No,
because it involves differential equations, but I mean, gravity is simple.
it
It's
is
simply
not.
the force equals the gravitational constant, a quarter of the gravitational constant times mass divided by distance squared. That we say, so
Very
gravity is a
tough.
simple predictive formula that only has, it has a constant, it has two masses and a distance. And so that's all that gravity is dependent upon, and has a predictive formula.
Ooh.
That you're saying evolution. Well, so this is what I'm referring to, the Mott and Bailey fallacy. That can you clearly define? And Joanna will have her presentation next. But can she clearly define evolution in a predictive way, and certainly, like, not in like a mathematical way, like, so to say gravity is clearly something
Hold on, let
that's
me write this down.
mathematical and could be predictive. If you throw something up in the air, or you drop something off a building, or even try to launch something into space, we have the formulas of gravity, and they could be exactly predictive. So evolution is a larger cosmology, universal explanation to the origins and purpose of life, an explanation, theological framework with elements of scientific biology, but as a whole, it is not predictive scientific model, but explanatory metaphysics. So we refer to evolution as the whole gamut of the claim that life arose from non-life, from inorganic materials, and that those precursor organic materials that theoretically arose from inorganic materials eventually formed together to DNA, RNA, and then life, and then simpler organisms through long periods of time evolved from one organism to the next to explain all modern life on Earth. So that's if we take evolution, like the whole gamut of what it's trying to say, as opposed to the independent scientific theories that are part of it. And so I mentioned Thomas Kuhn and his structure of scientific revolution. Currently, for the last 70, 80 years, 100 years, probably 70 years since the discovery of DNA, that evolution has served as the main paradigm for medicine and biology. And I strongly assert that the main function evolution does is to insert teleology into biology, because you have an
Wait,
atomic
what? I'm sorry, could you repeat that? It inserts what? Theology
teleology,
into.
teleology into biology. It serves purpose in that, from a pure materialistic, atomistic point, if you say there's just material and we're just made up of atoms, how is it that biological organisms serve a purpose? So evolution through information theory and genetics
What purpose are you
claims
looking to define here?
what claim like
What, I'm sorry. What was the first? Because you, I was gonna ask you, but you could wait. The question: can I show evolution does what exactly? Provide. It was something along those lines. You
well,
started.
can you even define evolution? I mean, saying evolution as the
Purpose
vague
is that what you're?
evolution, if you're going to separate it into its component theories, versus evolution, the cosmology that comes to explain
What is
where
evolution to
where life comes
cosmology?
from, and the origins of life, and
Uh,
the current status of life, and possibly even the direction of life.
okay. The direct. Okay. Yeah. 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 So
Okay,
that's
so more points. We discuss all these things, so apologize I'm taking longer than expected.
no
So
worries. Take as long as you like.
all these things are worthy of discussion. We could go through them all, or if Joanna prefers, we just pick out a few of them. The hard problem of consciousness. David Chalmers, 1995, at the Science of Consciousness conference. There you have Hammerhove and Penrose, and their faces spliced on the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and define what we call the hard problem of consciousness. Even when we have explained the performance of all the cognitive and behavioral functions in the vicinity of experience, perceptual discrimination, categorization, internal access, verbal report, there may still remain a further unanswered question: why is the performance of these functions accompanied by experience? How do you explain that there is an I, that there's a me that feels purpose, there's a me that feels unified, that this body is made up of 10 to the 23rd Avogadro's number, a huge number of various atoms, countless cells, countless different functions, and organ systems that all serve different functions. Yet there's a single Doooovid that's talking to you. There's a single me that I feel like when I experience pain or I decide to do something or have an emotion. And where does this singular me that experiences all these things derive from? That classically said, well, I believe it's a soul, that it doesn't derive from my body. It derives from something non-physical. So that's referred to as the heart problem of consciousness. There you see I have the classical brain function, where the different parts of the brain that are related to sense of the different parts of the body. And so the easy problem, explain the physical systems that give humans and other animals the ability to discriminate, integrate information. So even to describe any single information, like if I touch something cold, that I experience that coming cold, as opposed to the universal I that controls my whole body, but to say the singular I that has any given sensation. And the reality is there's no working model mechanism for consciousness, despite decades of research, failed explanations, that there's theories. But in terms of like the heart, so like Harvey's and the model of the heart, we could make a computer model. We could to describe exact mathematical formulation for something like the heart pumping blood and oxygen. But consciousness, there's no working model for how the brain produces thought. And I'm sure there'll be a point of arguing and saying that evolution. There are theories within evolution as an emergence, but comes the difficulty of one thing: how does the physical explain the phenomenon at all? And then if the phenomenon can't be explained physically, or even if it can be explained physically, how could that be explained through evolution? And what I refer to as reverse anthropomorphism, and even genetics in general will call reverse anthropomorphism, because genetics largely derives from Shannon Weaver information theory. And
I'm sorry, what does that mean? Could you define that for me? Reverse anthropomorphism? What is
I actually coined the term.
Okay.
So anthropomorphism is when you ascribe human traits to something non-human, non-physical.
Right, like a car will look like a smiley face, or feelings. Like my dog is feeling guilty because he didn't cuddle with me, but those are human emotions that I'm giving him, right? Correct? We're on the same page with that. I'm anthropomorphizing a human emotion onto my dog.
Yeah, so it's actually even related to the biological problem of teleology, in the sense, if you say like, well, the mitochondria is doing for acting for a purpose, like the reason the immune system is trying to protect the body from, you could even call that an anthropomorphization, because if you say like mechanistically, usually it's applied to computers, and saying, well, how does a computer actually function? And then you describe machines or inanimate objects the way that a human would act. So reverse anthropomorphism is when you describe the human based on how the computer acts. So we have a lot of knowledge these days about, it could be a better term, but that's the term I've been using, that we have a lot of knowledge about computer programming, how now we have AI, but how we program thought and intelligence into a computer. And actually we have significantly more knowledge about the computer than the human brain. So what we do is we reverse anthropomorphize. So like, how does human intelligence, how does if you, even something simple like 1 + 1 = 2, or any level of thought language, and I would argue that we actually have no precise model or explanation for anything. So even the something like, how do we know 1 + 1 = 2? We don't actually have a neural mechanism for what happens when a person does the most simple calculation. Although we do know exactly, like computer and logic gates and circuit logic, Boolean logic. So we reverse anthropomorphize, assuming that the brain operates in a similar way to a computer. And so consciousness, generally most theories these days center around reverse anthropomorphizations, assuming that the brain probably operates similar to a computer. The explanatory gap, also important concept, the difficulty that physicalist philosophies have in explaining how physical properties give rise to the way things feel subjectively when they are experienced. Even if consciousness is physical, it is not clear which physical states correspond to which conscious states. So, like the example, when you ask someone like a chest problem, you might have an MRI scan or different things that pop up in the brain. However, you don't have an exact mechanism of what happened. How did the person solve the problem? How did the person make that calculation? So you just have neural correlates of consciousness, that areas of the brain popped up, or that certain functions can't happen if that part of the brain is damaged, but you don't actually have a working model to explain even the most simple of the phenomenon.
Of
Here,
consciousness.
say again?
The simple phenomenon of consciousness as a whole, you're saying. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was on the same page. Okay. Continue.
Okay, so these are just general problems.
Abiogenesis. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that a lot of people when they argue against evolution focus on abiogenesis, that life comes from life. So abiogenesis, I guess it was like Greek, Latin, meaning like life arising, the arising of life, and so evolution is the grand theory that explains the origins of life and the general concept that inorganic material over a large period of time eventually developed into organic material, and those organic materials eventually formed together into like a precursor cell or something that was the early form of life. So, despite evolution being the main theory for over 100 years, we don't have any example of life arising from non-life.
We do.
Obviously, life happens all the time, and there's no genetically man-manufactured forms of life, and even like the current forms of like cloning or various things that they take biological materials to develop it from. So, it's a point we could argue, but my understanding or how you define life, that the grand theory of evolution necessitates at some point life arising from non-life, and the only evidence of life that we have is life arising from life. Another problem of evolution we call irreducible complexity. Biological systems with multiple interacting parts would not function if one of those parts were removed, so could not have evolved by successive small modifications that have no function or conflicting function, like venom injection mechanism. It could be just complex systems like any of the circulatory system, eyesight, even the brain consciousness, where it takes countless hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of parts working together at the same time. So the function of evolution, that all of those things would have evolved and came into place, even though they don't serve a purpose on their own. And then the strongest arguments like the venom injection mechanism, where the venom itself would be deadly to the animal, and the injection mechanism would be useless to the animal without the venom. So evolution would require that both units evolve independently, even though on their own they serve no purpose. Probability, information theory, as random processes could have basis for scientific model. Evolution relies on information transfer and update of information. So they got good old Claude Shannon, and to a large extent, genetics actually derives from information theory. If you know, like the history of biology, that the concept that there was some sort of code was already determined before they actually discovered DNA, and the idea that DNA serves.
Gregory Mendel was quite the pioneer for that. Are you familiar with him?
Well, yeah, of course.
That was before evolution.
But he didn't have a biological mechanism. He just said that he had a procedural mechanism for evolutionary processes in recessive and dominant traits, but he didn't have a biological mechanism. Until the 1940s, the dominant thought was that proteins contained the information. So it wasn't until Francis and Crick in the 40s or 50s discovered DNA. But the concept that they were searching for,
and germ theory, which is another theory.
well, it's just in the historical order that Claude Shannon's information theory predates the discovery of DNA, and that's why I mentioned the Shannon Weaver information theory. Weaver was the person at the Rockefeller Foundation that funded much of the research that led to molecular biology and coined the term molecular biology. So, I didn't prepare it in the slides, but if you look at the history, there was this concept that evolution was a form of information theory within some genetic code before they actually discovered DNA. So even that now they have DNA, and DNA is clearly the likely place where information is stored. That's still unclear. This concept of information. So a lot of evolution is based on a hypothetical, theoretical understanding of information, not actually material mechanisms, and kind of like, well, could have explanations.
But
And
we're
the more,
able to watch this information exchange and have a clear, decisive outcome.
well, we'll discuss that more, but I'd say no,
Okay.
it's not so. It's not so clear. Like the central dogma of genetics of Francis Crick of DNA coding for RNA coding for protein, that we know that DNA codes to RNA codes to protein. However, that information and purpose is coded in for it. It's still, there's a lot of processes to to say that evolution. There's a lot of unknowns within biology itself, and can we really claim that information is within DNA? That we know we have these atomic structures, and these atomic structures lead, the central dogma to RNA to protein coding. But when we talk about evolution, we're more actually talking about information as opposed to um, material mechanisms. And so it's hopefully a topic we'll cover more in depth. Uh, Entropy, this is also one of the early, even the creators of evolution itself, one of the earliest critiques of it was entropy. Entropy of an isolated system not in equilibrium will tend to increase over time, approaching a maximum value at equilibrium. That's why I mentioned science generally was canonized under the conservation of energy in the late 1800s, and all scientific theories, you have chemical energy, electrical energy, nuclear energy, mechanical energy, potential energy, thermodynamic energy, and also entropy. And so biological sciences like metabolism um, uh, all correspond to the conservation of energy, like the Krebs cycle. Almost all metabolistic cycles are only complete when they show how much energy, like adiabatic or the various cycles, either they release or consume energy, but they are generally within our understanding of science. They have to obey the conservation of energy, and they have this concept of entropy, that systems tend to increase um, in disorder over time. And obviously life is an increase in order. So obviously, people argue that energy is inputted, so overall entropy decreases, and it's just the temporal state of life. And you're saying life is an open system. That goes back to the metaphysical parsimony, Occam's razor, that there is no phenomenon other than life where you have this state of entropy, where you have this temporarily increase in order. And even if order is, if you say that for evolution to be true scientific theory, it can't conflict with entropy. And if it does conflict with entropy, it doesn't make sense that some theological or spiritual explanation, as opposed to some sort of passing the buck, or saying that life is unique. And so I have the active inference, and Kyle Friston from interviewed Daniel from Active Inference, and some of the interesting things. And Kyle Friston's actually a monist member of the Royal Society of London. And my final slide is ethics and morality. Our good chess playing buddies, Andrew and Kristen Tate, and Doooovid remembers Emery Tate when I used to play in national chess tournaments as a kid.
Very cool.
But a lot of their arguments are in evolutionary terms. The question of grounding morals in ethics. And classically, morals and ethics is grounded in dualism, in a spiritual realm, an immaterial soul, God, concepts of punishment for the wicked and reward of the righteous, meaning that my immaterial soul that is not part of my body, that is separate from my body, is judged, and there's some sort of karma, action, reaction. It's a non-physical event. And the common things of our society, like marriage, monogamy, traditional familial structure, are religious in origin, as well as most of our legal codes, uh, such as the natural law, like God forbid, murder, rape, and stealing. That the most of our code that says murder, rape, and stealing is bad and should be punished derives from spiritual systems. So evolution, natural selection, doesn't contradict our accepted morals. And if it is the scientific theory, uh, does evolution lead to nihilism, that morals and ethics are simply preferences, and should amoral, unethical behavior be more adaptive, will be selected for? Like T. Jump claimed that he feels that the people who win in the end are usually bad actors, that you can sin and cheat and get away with it. And most of the people who achieve the best are actually bad people who lie, steal, and cheat. And if evolution, natural selection, adaptation, uh, says that it's more adaptive to murder, rape, steal, God forbid, uh, where do you derive a moral, ethical system that says we shouldn't do it?
Are
And
we citing T Jump here as a resource for
no, just
biological science?
just an argument that I had. So,
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine.
um,
I don't know
so
him well, but he's yeah, seems like someone you wouldn't want on your. Okay,
I mean, he debated Jennifer twice on evolution. He's one of
yeah.
the more common uh, pro-evolution
Oh,
debaters, although he doesn't have a scientific background.
I would be on his side, yeah, in those debates, definitely. I
So
just
it's
wasn't
just,
expecting you to cite him.
yeah. So I've been going quite a while, so I appreciate Joanna for her patience. I'll give her as much time as she wants, and maybe it's more her answering my critiques of evolution than her formally teaching and presenting evolution. So um,
Sure.
just finish my last 2 points: the existence of the soul, afterlife, reincarnation, divine reward and punishment. That traditionally, morals and ethics derives from some sort of spiritual view, that like the relation of the heart, problem, the conscious. I am not my body, I am my soul, and the I that controls my body, that experiences what it means to be me, uh, survives death and will stand judgment before God, will either go to heaven or hell, or be reincarnated. So the ethics and morality derives from a dualistic system that necessitates an immaterial soul that is uh, judged. And so, does evolution excuse and justify amoral, unethical behavior? God forbid, sexual degeneracy. Like animals. If we are animals, uh, why shouldn't we behave like animals? And from a criticism of religious people, to not to impugn motive, but the question: well, why do people want to believe in evolution? And say, well, because people want to behave like animals. And if we are animals, why shouldn't we behave like that? So that's the end, I guess, of my rather long presentation. So I will hand it over to Joanna. I went forever there.
No, that's
So
great.
if you have a screen share, you could use your time if you want to you just ramble, or address my points, or if you want to present your presentation. So if you have a screen share, I'm
Yeah.
happy to put it on.
Great. Okay. I do have a screen share, and I do have some points I wrote down about what you were saying. Um, yeah, and but I actually have to run to the bathroom so bad. If you don't mind giving me like a 2 minute break, I can, or a minute break, just
Yeah, no
with me
problem.
answer some questions. I'll put my slide on. I'll just put the boring terms one if anyone.
Okay, no problem. So
Okay.
we'll eagerly await your response.
Wonderful. Let's get this. Share screen. All right. I'm pretty new to. I've only used this streaming device once before with you. We'll see how that goes. Okay. I was adding a couple of resources because of a few things you brought up. Anyways, I will be right back.
Okay, great. So
And yeah, go ahead. There's some questions. I don't know if you can see my chat. Some people are talking. But yeah, I will.
okay, yeah, Joanna has just more viewers than I have. So Joanna was live on. So I'll let her take her break, and let me see if there's anything interesting in the chat. So I guess, headbanger claiming I'm saying dubious stuff. And not only anything I said is dubious, almost all of my points are acknowledged by the founders of evolution. If you look at the original authors and theoreticians on evolution, I'm actually making the points that they themselves made, and especially the points about entropy and information theory. So that's a point. Like Doooovid likes the philosophy and history of science. If you look like what came first, information theory or genetics, and information theory predated genetics, and so that's one of the main points I wanted to discuss is like this what I call reverse anthropomorphization, where is evolution based on information theory or is it based on biology, and are we just assuming that the information theory of evolution corresponds to the molecular biology of genetics? And that's not like some dubious point that I made up. It's actually the point, lactose, and many people see my other content where I've read over it, but these are points that all of the founders of the field of evolution themselves made. The point of entropy is still one of the most hotly contested issues among evolutionists themselves. That the hard problem of consciousness, it might be assumed to a lot of amateurs that there is some sort of explanation, working model of consciousness. However, there is not. There's neural correlates of consciousness, but there's not actually a model of consciousness. In the questions of morals and ethics is actually deeply divided. And a lot of modern evolutionists are nihilist and do hold that ethics and morals is in fact just a preference, that there is no way to ground morals and ethics in a materialistic system. So I focused almost exclusively on well-known scientific points that are accepted by most evolutionists as legitimate critiques. But we have Joanna back. I will hand it over to her.
All right. Sorry, I missed whatever that excitement was. Exciting. Okay. So I started with just some key terms that are pretty essential when understanding evolution: species, populations, natural selection, artificial selection, genes, mutation, variation, adaptation, fitness. A lot of these are, I don't know how common actually they are now. We'll see. But the important things, I think, the important ones. So, hold on. We already talked about that. But this encompasses the theory of evolution, right? These definitions and ideas, they put together the theory entirely. The important ones are natural selection, is what you brought up quite a bit, is where individuals better adapted to their environment tend to produce more offspring, resulting in a change in population over time, right? That's how we get new species. But we also have learned about evolution. We can put our fingers in this, and that's called artificial selection, selective breeding to promote the appearance of desirable traits and offspring. This is how we get corn dogs, all sorts of things that we invented through our own manipulation of evolution, right? It's interesting. Fun stuff. But okay, very simply put, evolution is just the change in the characteristics of species over several generations. That's it. We know this happens because we've been witnessing it. We can witness it currently in action. We've witnessed it in past. We have just overwhelming evidence of this, right? It's just insane. How does it work though? Right? It's very simple. I was trying to think like, what's the most simple way I can put this? And this is what I came up with this morning. 4 easy steps to how evolution works. Species sometimes get random traits through mutation. Mutation can happen randomly. Mutation can be caused by environmental factors. Some traits make a species more likely to survive, making it easier to reproduce and pass on that trait, right? Birds, Darwin's example with finches, right? Different shell, whatever strings, more likely to get food, feed yourself, you're more likely to survive, reproduce. Those traits survive. Organisms with his new favorable trait are likely to survive, more likely to survive than those without. With enough reproduction within the group, the trait becomes a population norm. When the species become too genetically different to reproduce with the original population, they break into their own population, and it is then classified as a new species. Do you understand that? Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm well educated, like in evolution.
No, okay.
So you could go and do your whole
Do the whole thing?
presentation.
Okay. Theory. This is the most common situation I see brought up with this argument is the argument of what a theory is versus scientific theory. And people who very much, you can, I don't know how to make this big, sorry. But it's most commonly misunderstood. Theory is used a lot as in an everyday use of theory, which is, it represents a single unsubstantiated or speculative guess. That's what normal people use the word theory as, normal person's understanding of the word theory. Napping makes my life better is an example of a theory, right? A hypothesis is different. Hypothesis is a proposed explanation or assumption between exactly two variables that can be tested. A theory is not a hypothesis, okay? A hypothesis example would be taking a nap will make me feel more energized. Those are between two variables and an assumption or a guess that's testable. Scientific theory is not a theory. It is not a hypothesis. All right. It represents a group of observable, scientifically formulated explanations regarding the natural world on an experimentally and, very importantly, repeatedly verifiable manner. We can continuously test it and be reaffirmed that it's accurate. It's peer-reviewed. It's commonly accepted. Right? That's what a theory is. As atomic theory, theory of evolution, germ theory of disease, gravity. Those are all scientific theories, right?
I made on my point. I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
about physics as the gold standard, and like there's a scientific model and theory,
Yeah.
but does science have to be mathematical in terms of making predictions? And you could have like a legal theory, a social theory that has evidence and predictive, but science, does it have to have mathematical formulas, of which biology usually doesn't?
Well, that brings up a point that I was going to bring. Absolutely everything is reducible to maths, to physics, right? Absolutely everything. You can look at any branch of science and reduce it into, or look at it, or view it in a light of physics. Like you can reduce it into mathematics. You can find numbers in physics in absolutely any theory, anything. So yes, of course, it does. You can. It's quantitative. It's measurable. It's predictable to an extent. Okay. But then we go into different evidence. I was trying to break down different vestigial traits. I'm sure you've heard of, right? We have vestigial traits are remnants of evolutionary history. All species possess vestigial features. You're talking about your snake, and how does the snake evolve the ability to protect itself from the venom and the fangs at the same time. This ties into this. Okay, hold on. Let me finish. I'm trying to figure out trying to express my arguments, and this at the same time. I got to do one at a time. So anyways, vestigial features can be physiological or behavioral. We actually have more than 100 vestigial features that we know about. Examples that I just pulled: the appendix. We used to need our appendix when our diet was primarily a herbivore diet. Interesting fact: most mammals have them, but domestic mammals do not have the appendix. Right? They no longer need it. They've evolved the need to no longer have it. Similar with wisdom teeth. Wisdom teeth was back for when we had more of a herbivore, plant-based diet. If you look at other herbivores like cows, cattle, goats, whatever, they have big, large molars that we used to have wisdom teeth, but now we no longer need them. And now only about a third of the population no longer has wisdom teeth. A lot of them will just stay buried, and it's slowly, we're getting out of this. Goosebumps, right? Goosebumps cause fur to stand straight up, better insulating animals when they're cold, and also makes them appear larger to predators when they are afraid, making them less likely to be attacked. We still get goosebumps in response to cold, and we still get them in response to fear physiologically, although they no longer serve a purpose. We no longer have that hair, the fur over our body. It no longer insulates us. It doesn't make us bigger, right? It's a useless leftover from a previous stage of our ancestors, correct? A baby gripping your hand, right? Babies have an innate instinct to grip, right? They don't need that. Right now, they can't do anything useful with a grip. But back in earlier stages, and also in other primates, it's essential for a young primate to be able to grip, because it holds on to their mother, right? They don't lose themselves. They had to hold on to themselves. That's a leftover. There's so many. The coccyx, a useless and troublesome part of the tailbone that we no longer need. There's a ton, and they're in every species that we look at. Leftover remnants of earlier stages that we no longer need those features, but they remain because you can't just erase a feature, right? There's lots of microbial evidence. E. coli is the example my biology professor he favored because it has such a fast reproduction rate. But yeah, today's scientists use these fast reproducing microbes to witness evolution progress. And your example I've heard you use when you were like it seemed like you were teetering on the idea of evolution was COVID. There was so much widespread awareness of the COVID strands, right? Because it was critical. It was important for us to know how to study the evolution of this virus, to understand and predict and to make vaccines. And this study and this awareness saved countless lives, right? But that was a live, we could watch live evolution, and it saved a lot of lives. Vaccines, the reason we have a vaccine every year recommended to us, and why just one doesn't do the trick is because viruses evolve, they change. So the same vaccine that you used a few years ago isn't going to be as effective as the one now, right? Because we change those vaccines and tailor them to the latest variant. Antibiotic resistance is a huge issue, right? You can't enter a hospital or any sort of you can't enter a hospital, at least here, without declaring whether you've had MRSA or some sort of antibiotic resistant strain of bacteria, because it's a huge problem. It kills people, especially in hospitals, goes rampant in nursing homes especially. Misuse and overuse of antibiotics has led to the trackable evolution of antibiotics. Sorry, I do accents. I'm not at my stream. Antibiotic resistant bacteria, right? I don't know if you're familiar with how that works. Antibiotic resistance. Essentially, I'll just explain it. When you're exposed to a little bit of antibiotic, you're killing off the weaker population of that bacteria that you're trying to kill. And if you don't complete off that, you're creating room and habitable environment for that stronger half of that bacteria to grow. And then you're creating a population within yourself that's resistant to that bacteria, that antibiotic or treatment measure, and that can then be spread to other bacteria, right? And it's a huge problem. 35,000
we'll get into this
as
into
a result.
discussion, and that'll be the point. Like, even if I granted you all of these individual things, when you say evolution, what do you mean? You mean by evolution, we mean that life arose from non-life, and that modern life arose through these processes. That you say, well, okay, we could only really observe evolution in viruses, bacteria, and these handful of examples where reproduction happens so quickly that you potentially the mutations and change over time happens in a period of months that we could observe it. But so even if I grant that, but saying that's not the theory of evolution, that's just one aspect of the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution
is
evolution the extrapolation that explains the origin of all life and the current state of life that we know it today.
No, we can take this bacteria and we can watch it. We can physically watch it change and create. We can do this in a petri dish. We don't have to do it in the body. We can physically watch it. We can take a petri dish of bacteria. We can treat it halfway with antibiotics. We can kill off half the population, and then we can test it the next time. The next time you try to treat the same dish of bacteria after it's already been treated, it's not going to be as successful. The antibiotic that you use to treat it is not going to be as effective, right? And that keeps repeating, and that cycle creates stronger and stronger bacteria that's more resistant to the way we measure. And now we've created, through this process, this overuse of antibiotics, and we've created bacteria that's killing people. It's untreatable.
Yeah, I understand the process, and even if I were to fully admit it, I'm saying, is that process natural selection? That is just one component? Or is that process what you're calling evolution? Or are you looking at evolution as the whole cosmology? We call the Mott and Bailey fallacy. That even if I grant that point, am I granting evolution, or I'm just granting one component of evolution? And then when you mean evolution, you don't mean the small process. You mean a cosmology that explains the origin of all life.
Both. This is an example of that process that is an everyday visible and a huge problem killing people. And the study of this exact process in this exact context in abiotic resistance saves countless lives and is the reason we can successfully perform surgeries, treat diseases. It's the whole backbone, I'll keep saying this, of modern medicine is because of our study of evolution, is why we can treat this, why we can predict to an extent where this is going. It's both. It is an example of how evolution works through natural selection, also artificial selection. And if you want to take that back to your ideology of how life started, that's up to you. We can go back to that far. That's fine. But right now I'm talking about just how this is applied today in
We'll talk about more. You just
modern
go ahead and finish your
applications.
slides.
Yeah, okay. There's not much left. So yeah, another big chunk of evidence, of course, is the fossil record. Right? Paleontologists recovered remains of thousands of organisms that are very different from anything currently living. The fossil record depicts the transition of organisms to organism. Right? We have great examples of this. Many extinct species, such as the Tiktaalik, Runcaria, and I'm not going to say this right, Archaeopteryx, are famous for showcasing transitions between the species we know today. Fossils provide evidence going back 3.5 billion years ago, which might also ruffle feathers. I don't know. It's up to you. GMOs. All right. GMOs are an example of artificial selection, right? This is evolution in process, not by means of. This is artificial selection, right? It's different. We did this. And thank goodness, because it literally saves billions of lives. It has. It's projected to save so many lives. I have a link. I have all the links at the end of the slide if you're interested. But golden rice is an example, a GMO that prevents an estimated 200 to 700,000 people from dying, many of them children, from dying prematurely every year in poor countries because of vitamin A deficiency. But there are a lot of genetically modified organisms, crops specifically, eggplant. There's so many that are genetically engineered to produce a certain outcome, whether that's crop resistance from extreme weather, pests, drought, disease, so many things. We can do that because of our study of evolution. Dogs, we wouldn't have dogs without evolution. How do you think we got dogs? That is completely our hand in that with artificial selection. Why do we have so many dog breeds? Because we pick and choose traits, right? Breeders will be like, oh, there's a litter of puppies. This is the cute white one. I want cute white puppies. So they'll grab that cute white puppy and breed it with them. And then I'll take the cute white puppies from that breed. And then eventually that dog starts producing more cute white babies until it's a breed of its own. Corn is also a species that did not exist before artificial selection. And this one is where I ran out of energy and I copied someone else's. This was published at Arizona University Center of Evolution and Medicine, written by Kenneth Butow. All of his credentials are in the end there, but my original thoughts for this slide were talking about stem cell, CRISPR, antibiotics, vaccine, surgery, treatment, resistance, a lot of what we already discussed. But I like what he brought into here. Modern medicine, because of evolution, this is the how evolution is affecting modern medicine today. The biggest 5 big ways. Advancing cancer research. Studies suggest tumors are made up of lots of genetically different cells that compete and cooperate with each other using the rules of evolution. This evolution is helping researchers change and improve cancer therapy, battling antibiotic resistance. We already went into that. Understanding autoimmune disease. Women are less likely to get cancer, but more likely to get autoimmune diseases, like myself. Like multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. The way the female body has evolved to accommodate pregnancy may explain why this happens and other clues for new treatments to both cancer and autoimmune cases. Identifying risk factors of diabetes and heart disease. The healthiest hearts ever studied are those of the Bolivian Amazon Sum tribe, who lives as a hunter-gatherer ancestors once did. That knowledge is being used to better understand how the industrialized world impacts rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Other new perspective on treatment. DNA research suggests modern human ancestors bred with related human species. That information gives us hints about where modern diseases came from and can be used to come up with novel targets for treatment. Okay, That's what I have. But if you want to look into any of those resources, where I got them, they're all right there at the end. So, do you want me to go into the stuff I wrote about yours, or how do you want to play this?
Okay, great. Are you done with the screen share?
Yes.
Okay. I think you're a mod on my YouTube. If you're not, you could, I don't know if you put like on Google your slides, if people did want to see the links. I'm not sure if my audience is going to care enough to look at your source material. So, why don't I make just like a very quick, less than a minute or two, clarifying points on what I'm trying to say, and then I'll let you give general comment on the points that I made, because I think you just did a kind of like a general presentation of what evolution is.
Yeah.
And so I don't necessarily. I mean, we could go through any of those points, and if you have time, we will. But I'm looking at the standard of evidence. So there's a question: is it scientific in the sense, what is truth? How much uncertainty is there? And say, well, the reality is we're extremely far from knowing the truth, or so to say, especially something like the origins of everything. Like I'm just a speck of nothing that, like, and I'm a nerd, like maybe Joanna's a nerd, and we spend most of our time reading and studying and thinking about these things. But to say like, that we're going to know everything there is to know about the universe and the origins of everything, even with the combined collective power of humankind. So I'm not necessarily saying like evolution is false or that I have a better explanation. I'm just like, what's the level of uncertainty, and where should we put this concept of evolution, and to separate the various mechanisms that many of them are relatively very strong, have significant amount of evidence, depending on how you define scientific theory, are accepted scientific theories, versus this greater cosmology, like who am I, where did I come from? And you're saying, well, billions of years ago, like so and so, and this is the origin, versus saying like, no, I mean, God created the world in 7 days, or like the deities, or a spiritual explanation of a soul, or various factors. And so I would say we live mostly in darkness and uncertainty, and science is extremely useful. Science explains a lot of things, but can we call science truth? And then the level of internal, what we know from our consciousness, our mind, even if we don't know the origins of consciousness, maybe what we would call spiritual understanding. So my main criticisms, and we go through all the points, is of the cosmology of evolution to explain the history of all life and the current state of human life. But I also have.
I think you need to argue a different theory. You need to go to the Big Bang theory. If
I'm
you're
not talking
looking at the
about the origin of the universe. I'm just talking about the origin of life.
okay,
So I'm
but
not talking. I'm not talking about the origin of the universe, and that'd be a separate debate. Just the origin of life.
right, I feel like that would cover that. I mean, that's more of a topic for that than evolution. Evolution doesn't cover the as you put it, the cosmology of evolution. No, that's the Big Bang theory. This creation of life, and what you were mentioning too. This life cannot be created from not life. That's wrong. That's true. I put that link in there too. We've done that. We've created, by all classifications of the term, all life. We've created bacteria. I put the link in there. You can see we've done this. We've already created life by every definition.
I have to look at those experiments, but I understand that's not the case. That you need that where, so to say, life has been created that is with organic material, and to
But
say the creation of life from non-life in that extent. So if you're
but
talking about the creation of a single protein, or if you're talking about the creation of
bacteria.
a single bacteria cell, that was it created from other cells, even
That's how
dead
we
cells?
start. I'm sorry. But no, my point bringing that up wasn't to bring that. It's not an evolution. What you're talking about is origin of life. That's not an evolutionary debate. Evolution is how life changes, how species change, how we get new species, right? How it started is not an evolutionary debate.
Well, it's a Matt and Bailey, because typically when people use the word evolution, they mean the origins of life. and that if you're talking about any of the various theories that you use, those are not actually evolution; those are separate biological phenomenon, like so say natural selection or genetics, breeding, various things, and that evolution is the totality of all these things together to explain change. And then if you're talking about observable, like the most case that the bacteria and viruses, that they don't actually change into different life; they just evolve, so to say. They just select, and even say whether they evolved through mutation is still questionable, whether that could be evidentially provided. But they didn't evolve; they just if you want to use the word, they evolved, like they evolved to function, but they didn't change from one species to another. And so if you say that evolution doesn't claim that you could change from one, not say you, but that life could change from one species to another, generally that you're saying the theory of evolution is inclusive of all of these things. It's a blanket theory that comes together as a cosmology to explain the origin of life in like you talk about vestigial organs or the fossil record.
It
The
feeds
evolution,
into that, but it's not. It's a theory on change. It's not a theory on origin.
well, it's not well defined. That's the problem.
It feeds
Evolution
into
evolution
it.
is not well defined.
How so? How isn't it well defined?
Because if you want to say you're not including that in evolution, but that's inclusive in evolution. That's the contemporary understanding of evolution as a cosmology of the origins of life, and to say that evolution doesn't claim that there was common ancestors, and that these common ancestors evolved into the species that we know today, and that's the reason, so to say, explain the various fossil records or genetic evidence or vestigial organs or something like that. You're saying that's not actually part of evolution.
I'm sorry.
And
Could you?
if that's not evolution, what is it?
No, it is. It is. It is a part of evolution. Why are you saying it otherwise? I'm sorry. I don't understand.
Saying evolution has a broad or a narrow definition, and
Hmm.
that's why I call the Motte-Bailey fallacy. So you
Mm.
want to claim that the narrow definition is scientific, and then you say, well, because you accepted the narrow definition, therefore the broad definition is scientific also. You say that you're like, okay, like we have viruses and they had mutations and now they've
Hmm.
adapted and now they're resistant to certain antibodies. Evolution, voila. Therefore, therefore, life arose. Like we life arose from simpler life forms. So I was saying, like, no, that's the broad versus the narrow definition. And the
Well,
most narrow definition,
simple versus
the
complex. I
only
would
thing we
use.
actually have evidence for in terms of evolution, like direct evidence, is viruses and bacteria. That's the only thing that we could actually observe,
Why not the
uh,
fossil record? Why do you discount that? Why do you discount fossil record or radioactive dating?
because we don't observe that. That's an explanation of things that already happened. I mean, you could directly observe bacteria and viruses in a laboratory. You could see it happen before your eyes,
You're
as
a
opposed to
history. You're a history fan. Of course, we use past historical information to gain bigger ideas of present.
well, I like history also, but saying history is not a science.
No, but that's how we build information as a society.
Yeah, so he's saying like
And it's applicable in history and science. We
if we
work.
put it in that terms, evolution as an explanation of history is not science; it's history. So he's saying evolution as a scientific theory, you might be extrapolated to inform history, and you're saying, well, why do we have these bones here? And you'd say you extrapolate on a historical
why
explanation,
why
but
would you
that's not
just?
science as opposed to
It is
observation.
though. Historical observation is science. Why would you exclude, like, think of all of the information we would exclude scientifically if it's just because it was historical. It's everything. It's absolutely everything. We take information, even though it was historical, we take clues and information, we build ideas with it. If we discredit absolutely everything that happened before present, where would we be? We would have no fundamental stepping stones to gather. This is how science evolves. How we gain scientific momentum is by working on the backs and building blocks that somebody else built. All of the scientists you mentioned, they worked on other people's backs, right? They used historical information that was presented to them, observed by somebody else, right? And that's taking words from other people. That's taking information from other people and working off that. Now we have actual, discernible, hard, physical proof. That why would you discredit that?
Well, I'm going to discredit something. We want to differentiate between what we're going to call evidence, models, predictive theories, and if you're going to have like a higher bar of a scientific theory and the level of prediction and falsibility. And you're saying, well, scientific theories predict something about the future and they're falsifiable. And if you want to talk the level of prediction, like the gold standard of physics, that they have a prediction that has an actual mathematical formulation. So they're giving something that will have a numerical, measurable prediction,
Yeah.
and that so that the gold standard for any form of
Evolution.
scientific theory is something that's going to make a falsifiable prediction about the future that will be determinable by an equation. You could be independently verified and tested, and is falsifiable by measurement, by the prediction that it's making that can be measured, and would be falsifiable by measuring something different than what's predicted.
How is evolution not falsifiable?
Because it doesn't make testable predictions about the future.
It does. It absolutely does. And COVID is a perfect example. It absolutely does.
Yeah, it's saying it doesn't make measurable mathematical
Antibiotic resistance. No, it absolutely does. The case of the petri dish versus petri dish, we can make mathematical predictions versus if this is exposed, this batch of bacteria is exposed to this amount of antibiotic, then we're going to see this amount of antibiotic resistance. We absolutely can put numbers to this.
Well, if you want to break down what is actually predictable and what's not, so to say evolution, natural selection, and actually the term a lot of times is used entropy. The prediction is that there's going to be a copying error of about 1 in 10,000. And so on my stream, like I looked at like the next gen strain stream where you actually could see the genetic record of all, God forbid, like COVID-19 has about 30,000 base pairs. It's one of, I think the larger viruses. There's other viruses that have as few as 1,000 base pairs, and like a virus maxes out at about 30,000 base pairs, and you have an average coding error of 1 in 10,000. So if you're going to make a prediction, so to say, the prediction is that there will be 1 out of 10,000 coding errors, and then of those coding errors, that some of those coding errors will cause a new function, and if that if that new function is adaptable, that will become the dominant strain. So God forbid, under COVID-19, we saw that like in the spike protein, where we had the whole genetic code of the original strand, and I'll mention why that could be problematic. But over time, there were multiple mutations, and those mutations caused a difference in the spike protein. And then over a period of time, that new mutated form became more adaptive and became the dominant strain. Mm-hmm. So this is the only example within all of evolutionary science that you actually have in terms of something that could be observed in a scientific sense.
No, you haven't looked long enough. Way before COVID, we've been viewing this microbially for so long. We've been.
I mean, COVID's the only example. I'm talking about viruses, bacteria, things that have a very short reproduction life cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's the easiest place to view it. That's we can live long enough to see that. We have to study things with very fast reproduction rates, because
we've seen small changes, like God forbid, like the spike protein, mm-hmm. or if you're in immunology, God forbid, my mother has immunology problems or various things, and constantly has to get new medications and
And the study of
but
evolution is helping her doctors figure out and predict how that medication is going to affect her body, and to develop a timeline of when that's going to stop affecting, when it's going to stop working
well,
because of
we call that
evolution. Because
evolution to say
no,
that
but it's a
you
study.
had medicine
Evolution
before.
is
You
the
had,
study of the change of a species over time.
yeah, but it's not
Period.
necessarily evolution that helps medicine.
Of course it
Evolution
is.
is
It's
just
the backbone. It's how they make their decisions. It's how they make guesstimates. It's how they know,
well,
okay, if you have this infection, we're going to give you this antibiotic and you have to take it this many days or else it's going to make you way worse. That's how they know how many days to give it to you. That's how they know how much strength, because they've been watching the bacteria that they're treating. They've been watching it evolve in a petri dish. So they know exactly what it's going to do, what your mother needs, and how long it's going to help her.
no, I mean, that's not evolution. That's not just the scientific method and experimentation is sufficient without evolution. So just saying whatever reason why this previous medicine stopped working and this new one that maybe we say is evolution, but the using the scientific method of experiment would still be sufficient to keep on producing new antibodies. Evolution is just explanatory.
Well, no, because you wouldn't know how that
You're saying without the
you
theory of evolution, you couldn't create new antibodies, and even the
you
antibodies are
wouldn't
directly related
the
to.
doctor would not know how to treat you. No, we wouldn't know how much to give you. We wouldn't know the dangers of what the bacteria could become and how to prevent that from happening. Without the study of evolution and the doctors understanding that firmly, and there are plenty of brilliant doctors that refute the evolution, whatever, but that does not change the fact that their education is completely based off of that. We've developed these ideas, and the way you were speaking with this patterning is much how evolution has inspired all sorts of fields like computer science, AI. We take the same models that we've witnessed in life, in biology, witnessing living species and creatures. We've taken these same models and applied them to computer science, AI, so many things, and are largely based on that. It's
Well,
everywhere. It's
let's see if
everywhere.
we could just agree upon what is actually observed and known, and what is theory.
Okay, observed
And
and
so,
known,
if
but
we're talking about what is observed and known, is in terms of evolution is basically only in single cell organisms, and we've observed mutations and adaptations
Mhm.
and new dominant populations that have derived from mutations that but we have not observed speciation. We've not observed a virus becoming something else. We've only observed a virus. uh, you might even argue whether we've actually observed, we could actually determine that the virus arose from mutation, that because viruses are so small and there's millions of examples, that it's possible that all of these various strains were always there.
But
And
you
it's
have
not, you can't isolate it. I mean, to the level of like exact science, you can't isolate to independently prove that the dominant species wasn't already there and arose through mutation, because like you can't get like a single virus or a petri that just has one virus and demonstrate that that's the one that mutated, because there's always thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of virus, and it's possible that it didn't arise through mutation
mhm.
and that it was always there. But even if you grant that it was arose from mutation and then became the dominant variant, that that's the most that we've ever observed, that some sort of adaptation through mutation that became the dominant variant, and anything other than that is extrapolation.
Well, okay, that's the tricky thing
And
about
are you recognizing that that's the
yes.
current state of investigation, that in terms of evolution, the most we've ever observed is single cell organisms um, having minor adaptations that became the dominant strain. That's the totality of what has been observed.
Absolutely not. I completely disagree with that. No, we witness it. It's witnessable in so many things, and it's really sad that you discredit all of the fossil record.
I'm not
Um,
discrediting that. I'm just saying that's not something we observe. That's history. That's
that's
not
history,
something,
yeah, but
because that's
history is
not something that's not
observable
something that could
evidence.
be that's not
No,
something that could be independently tested
it's not
according
history.
to the
Okay,
scientific method.
fossils are not history, they're current. Fossils are actual current evidence that we can actually feel and observe and validate today currently,
I'm not
right?
saying that they're not
They're
evidence. I mean,
It's
they have
current
some level
though.
of evidence, but they can't be independently tested and verified in a laboratory in the same way that
Right.
um, viruses and
That's
bacteria can.
that's the struggle with evolution and a lot of people's understanding of it. Evolution happens over many, many reproductive cycles, and our lifespan is too short to sit and actively witness enough life cycles of an animal to change. So we have to look at the evidence that we have of this, right? It's just not enough time. Everything is unknown until it's known, right?
That's what I'm trying to
We
get you
can't
to
we can't just
clarify
assume something is not
between
correct just because we don't
between
have
the
enough
cosmology of
information.
evolution
Well, okay, the
and what
okay, can
currently could
we
be.
throw away cosmology of evolution? What does that mean to you? You're talking about the origin of life with that, correct? Uh, I,
I'm saying I believe humans were created as is. We did not evolve from lower life forms.
then why? What about
And
all of the
although
fossils that?
I accept that what we see in terms of petri dishes between viruses, and if you want to call that evolution, I believe in evolution. I believe in immunology
Mhm.
and viruses and bacteria, mutating and
There's
evolving adaptations. I do not believe that one species. I believe that all species were created as is.
uh-huh.
And so, just saying, well, that's my belief system. So say, well, so if you're going to say, I believe in evolution, if you want to talk about viruses and bacteria, but I do not believe that that could be extrapolated to saying that complicated life forms evolved through this process, simpler
Mhm.
life forms through this process evolved into more complex life forms.
You think dogs were just put on this earth as is?
Well, personally, that yeah, I believe that all species. I mean, I actually believe in
So
devolution.
here's
I believe that we devolved from higher life forms. That's my personal
see
belief.
that word was what got me like to be like I need to join in here. The idea of
Devolution.
devolution, whatever. Okay, that's
I mean, so
yeah.
that we descended
Anyways,
from the gods. We did not ascend from lower life forms. We descended from the
got it.
gods.
Okay, got it. But these are 5 examples of witnessable evolution in species. Guppies adapted to predators. Green and woolly lizards adapted to invasive species. Salmon adapted to human interference. Bedbugs adapted to pesticides. Owls adapted to warmer winters. I made just 5, but we witness this everywhere. You're not looking hard enough. Um,
No, you're just not speaking in precise language. We don't witness this. The only thing we witness is micro single cell organisms in petri dish. That's the only thing we witness scientifically. That's the only thing that could be independently isolated and tested in a laboratory.
no,
So
okay.
scientifically, you could say we
Mhm.
witness just like we witness economics and social theory everywhere,
Why
but
are
in terms
bugs
like a
becoming
scientific
pest?
theory.
Why are all of a sudden bugs becoming resistant to pesticides in certain locations where pesticides are used? Where that resistance is unseen in other any interference. That bug has specifically become resistant to a chemical that we use in
Even if I
everyday crops.
granted to you that that was through an
What is
evolutionary
this
process,
granting me? Research it.
I
Look
have
into
researched it and
it.
say that it can't be independently isolated to the process of mutation and natural selection because it's possible. Like I mean, right now there's billions of bugs out there, and it's possible that the
No,
bug.
they can sequence the DNA and they can identify the exact changes in that and what caused it and
But
the genetic
they
mutation.
haven't actually.
They can isolate no they can isolate the genetic mutation that happened. They can isolate the progression of it through its relatives and then the population change over time
I mean,
and isolate it to that specific.
just to
d- d-
clarify the bar for what would it would take to demonstrate that evolution is what happened. So even in the petri dish, what I was mentioning, if you have a petri dish that has 100,000 viruses in it, and you've tested, and you've taken
it's
the
no,
genetic
it's
code,
got to be the
and
same
you've
virus. It's
sequenced
got to
the
be the same
genetic,
species.
yeah. So if you have a petri dish that just has one virus in it,
Well,
and
okay, sorry.
you've sequenced the
Again,
genetic code.
a virus is not living in all definitions of the term. A virus
Well,
does
okay.
not
I mean, if you want to take a
constitute life in every
whatever the case,
characteristic.
I'm just giving the
Bacteria, use
bar.
bacteria.
Okay, if you have a bacteria where you just have one bacteria and it's been genetically sequenced, and then from that one bacteria, it has been cultured to larger, and then you've shown that all of the bacteria have the same genetic sequence, to eventually that single cell bacteria that has been cultured to through mutation, that you could demonstrate that the change happened to mutation, as opposed to if you had a culture that had 1,000 single cell bacteria and maybe you sequenced a handful of them, you don't know for sure that the new strain or variant arose through mutation. It could have always been there.
No, you
So
can't
in the
because
case
you're
of the
starting
bug,
with an isolated.
in terms of like pesticide resistance,
No, but you
you
can't.
can't
You
you
start with an
can't
isolated.
isolate and show that it arose through mutation. It's possible
You can
that,
though. You can. You absolutely can. The
well, you
science
can,
is
but I'm saying
here.
that
And
hasn't been
we've
demonstrated.
been doing it. Yes, we have. It's been demonstrated repeatedly. We can witness this, and we've done it in so many
Well, you
things.
could do it in a laboratory. You can't do it in the wild. So if I have a farm and I'm using pesticide, and all of a sudden there's they're dying out, and then next thing you know, there's a
Well,
new
how?
brand that's
Well, of course, you're going to need a
resistant. It
microscope. It's a
doesn't mean that it
microscopic
evolved. It could be
event.
that there was one strain pre-existent that now became dominant. So in a laboratory,
How
you
do you
could
think it
isolate
became
it.
dominant?
I mean, so
Evolution. If it was the fittest, that trait, whatever it mutated, that trait became a survival asset, which then
yes, and
put
so
it
just
above its
demonstrate natural
survivability.
selection.
Then it's pure population, right? So it increased that. That's how it becomes dominant. That's how new traits. That's how new.
But it
How
didn't
okay this
demonstrate evolution; it just demonstrated natural
okay
selection.
all
It
life
only
starts
demonstrates
at
evolution if
this.
it's something new, if you could conclusively prove that the new strain was not previously in existence. So in a
Right, which we can
laboratory,
do it in an isolated
you'd have to show
environment.
that that genetic code never existed before in the past and
Yeah, which we
was a
do,
new.
which we've done so many times, which we
Well, I'm saying we
consistently
that.
do. I
Well,
mean,
I mean, one thing the
science,
question is we.
biologists,
One, by saying that like we,
modern,
I
modern,
haven't done that. You haven't done that. So if
modern
you're saying there's a
science.
study
No,
that
I'm
has done
saying
that,
we as in humans. We've already know how
but
to
it's
do
not we
that.
as in humans.
On the
You're saying
scientific
it's an
ladder,
individual
we've already
scientific
been
scientist
there.
who would have done it.
No,
I'm saying if there was,
collectively, that
well,
information
that's
is
a misnomer. That
available
is saying
and
that
it's repeatable.
that's a misnomer. That's a unscientific. Even to say that there's such a thing as we collectively as humans is just a postulation. It's not scientific. I mean, saying that one individual scientist did this experiment and it would be replicatable independently by other people.
Label it as you
There is
want,
no
but
necessarily collective we as humans. There's
no,
individual
of
scientists
course,
who do experiments, and then other
this is very
individual scientists
commonly
who
used this
replicate
way.
and
It's
test the experiments.
no, okay. This is turning into a semantics argument that has nothing to do with biology or evolution or whatever your ideas are, but a semantics argument. But using we have already done that as a scientific collective, as a societal advancement, right? We have. That's in that terms, okay. But I don't want to digress into a semantics argument because that we can pick apart absolutely everything we do here in that light. Let's keep it about the science. Um, so you think
Okay.
all life was as is, began this way and has not changed and has started this way. So how did we get these changes in the virus that you witnessed?
Well, the virus is still the virus. They're saying we've witnessed. So, like,
All life is life.
God forbid, there's a lot of different viruses, and we've never.
It was just a different virus, you think? That they just found like a different one? They discovered one. It wasn't the one changing, that they just discovered different ones? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, actually, I mean, and viruses are one thing because a lot of people don't hold their life and they can't independently reproduce without using another cell mechanism. But viruses are interesting because many people believe that the most abundant form on the planet is viruses, and there's actually like billions or trillions of forms of viruses. And like if you test the water,
Bacteria.
well, bacteria and viruses.
Well, bacteria are a little bit more alive than viruses. Viruses don't evolve. They don't develop, I should say.
Yeah, I'm saying the majority of viruses infect bacteria. I mean, most like we as humans generally only study viruses that affect humans or
did you know that
animal or livestock or occasionally like plants and agriculture. But viruses are abundant, and it's thought like if you do
team
genetic
bacteria.
sequencing on ocean water, there's countless viruses, and even so the most abundant of all life on the planet is viruses, if you consider viruses life.
Right.
Uh,
Some do,
but
some don't. I stay out of the argument. It's just missing one of the characteristics of life.
but in that aspect, to say that were all viruses created as is, or is there such a phenomenon of one virus changing to another? So you have like the examples of
Mhm.
COVID-19 and the spike protein, and there were changes, but we've never seen COVID-19, or I mean, COVID-19 is from the family of viruses, and I'm not a biologist. It's slipping my name of the family of COVID-19 viruses, but we've never seen one in a a controlled experiment in a laboratory, one virus changing into another type of virus. We've only seen small adaptations
Yeah.
that
Bacteria
like
is
the
a better
spike. Like,
example.
I don't think there's an example of a bacteria
Oh
turning
yeah.
from one form of bacteria to another. They're just small adaptations that have changed, and they're
That's
still the same bacteria, just like a dog or something through breeding.
mhm.
That maybe we've seen new breeds of dogs. It's unclear whether we've seen any change in dogs through mutation. So all the breeding of dogs, those are traits that are currently in existence. So we haven't actually seen new existent dogs, or
Were they,
even bugs, or any example. We've
you
never
don't think
seen.
they were wolves? You don't believe that the dogs descended from wolves then, and eventually, like there was a time where there were no domesticated dogs; they were just
What's
wolves.
your word belief? That's the question. Okay, so there's what
No,
I
I'm
believe,
asking you.
but
Yeah, what you
but
think
but it's a
about it.
question of uncertainty. That there you're already talking cosmology of evolution.
Can you please
That
define the because I think this is a term that can fluctuate between user. Define cosmology in this context.
creation story.
So okay, so it is just origin. This is the
Yeah, I mean,
origin.
call origin, creation story, origins.
Yeah, sure, sure.
So if
So
you're saying
you're
like
talking about
the
life,
creation
the origin
story,
of
origin,
life.
so evolution as a creation story.
Okay, so
You
your
want to say
problem with
because it's a
evolution isn't necessarily the observable change in the process of it, but your problem with it is that it's used to explain in part our life's origin, right? Correct? That's your issue with it.
well, I
Life's
don't
origin.
necessarily have a problem with it. I just say,
Well, because this
I
is
mean,
like this is evolution on trial. I'm defending evolution.
well, yeah, I mean, in
So
that
what if
sense,
there is a problem?
well, I mean, my problem with it is that yeah, I have an alternative belief in cosmology, and then I would say even evidentiary, without claiming the reason I reject evolution as a cosmology is because it conflicts with my alternative cosmology, but
Mhm.
just in terms of evidence, in
Right.
terms just talking
What's missing
empiricism
to you?
and science, that I have a problem with evolution as a cosmology, evidentiary, and
Mhm.
as extrapolation. And you say, well, I'll admit my bias and my motive to why I want to reject the cosmology of evolution,
No, we don't
but
even. I'm not even like going on that. Like,
I'll frame my arguments not in terms of, in pure terms of scientific empiricism,
yeah.
that the cosmology of evolution, the evidence weakly supports it, and there's a lot of problems with it.
What are the problems? Let's go over them.
Well, I mentioned like abiogenesis.
Okay, one
Uh,
second. Okay, Abiogenesis. I sent you a link. It's on the bottom, or it's on my list. But we have done that. We have created life from non-living material. We've done that. I'll let you read
I'm not.
the link
I have
later.
to look at that link, but I
No,
highly would reject that. I mean,
you can look at lots of links about it. It was quite a phenomenon. Okay, it was really exciting science news.
my
Uh,
Yeah, but
everything converted to physics with
we've created a unit of life. If you're talking like you created a single cell
a
organism,
unit of life that can
or
evolve.
you created a protein.
No, it's a bacteria. A protein is not life.
And in the sense, like, yeah, you could like a
No,
virus,
life. We can create
like
proteins long time ago.
even like
Life.
the current uh
In all the characteristics of what life is, more life than a virus we've created
what
from non-life. A
what
more living organism than virus. Think about that. We've done that from non-living
no, I
material.
mean, but you have to be precise in your terms. So I mean, if you're talking
What do you
like the vaccine, where what we did was we created an artificial genetic strand, and then place that genetic strand into a capsule, and then place that into a cell, and then that cell produced other things. So in that sense, like, yeah, we could print or splice an RNA strand and then insert that RNA strand into a living cell
in this
and use the living cell to make life.
mhm.
But is that saying we created life in that sense? Like,
In this example? in this
Are you
example,
talking about like a single cell organism that
yes,
from?
no, okay. In this example, it was
And
an
I'll give you a screen
organism,
share if you want to do a screen share. You have
a,
up there,
bact-
but you're claiming like a single cell organism that we
a
created.
bacterial organism that was created completely from non-living material, yes, inorganic material,
In
not
terms of like the
inorganic,
cell
non-living.
wall. And
Hold on,
I mean, my cell biology, I don't know if like they have, mitochondria or
did you know the mitochondria was a bacteria? It did not originate in our body. It was an encapsulated bacteria in our ancestors' or enclosed body
I
that
mean, if you're
evolved
talking like the
into
Miller,
which that's reproduced and is now the powerhouse of all of our cellular activity. It was once a bacteria.
I mean, if you have this and you want to screen share, because like I'm
Which part?
any part like
The
that
bacteria. Okay,
any showing that there's been
the
uh, uh,
mitochondria
that
was
we
once a
have created
bacteria.
life from
Do you want me to
non-life.
talk about that? Okay, the mitochondria was once a bacteria or
Do you have?
life from non-life. Which one?
I mean, if you have a screen share, I'll share it. But that any demonstration of life created from non-life,
Sure.
because my understanding, like maybe there's been proteins created, but in terms of even
Not
this, like,
protein. Protein is not life.
yeah, I'm talking like a single cell organism.
So here we go. One moment, don't plug for water. Is the Smithsonian? I'm trying to find because this is written about by so many different people. Is the Smithsonian a trusted source for you?
Well, I mean, semi, but I have to look at it because as far as I know,
Okay, there's
it
one.
doesn't exist.
I put it in the link. There's the private chat there, but there's a lot more if you're. And also I have an article of the biology of consciousness, which is interesting. Um, a couple other things before we get off topic here. Quick notes that about you had a whole slide about ethics, right? The evolution of ethics and morality. Good God, that makes no sense to me. I don't understand it. Why do you feel that a human needs a religious guide or the threat of eternal damnation or reward to behave decently? Why? That's terrifying to me to assume, like, why people think they need the threat of damnation to not murder or rape or whatever examples you'd use. No, young children have this idea before they're introduced into or able to understand any theology, right? Do unto others as you want to be done. And there's an evolutionary basis because of that. Because people that cooperate, species that cooperate and help each other are more likely to survive. So they did survive. And you know what? They passed those cooperative genes on to their young. That's why we do that. We treat people, it's a very simple concept that no religion needs to be ethical.
I mean, just to show this article does not.
It does. Click on the links.
Well, I'm looking at it saying research from England's
Hold on,
have
let me find it
successfully
better.
created E. coli bacteria from entirely human-made DNA. The redesigned DNA consisted of $4 million segments. They did not create life out of non-life.
Okay,
They used
another
existing DNA to splice other DNA, and then they were successful. That's similar to a vaccine. They did not create life from non-life. They modified existing life.
It's synthetic biology. E. coli, thrive. DNA constructed from scratch by humans,
It's not conducted
nature.
from scratch. It was conducted from.
Look at the second link. It was. Whose DNA is entirely human-made, perhaps a new form of life. Experts said a milestone in the field of synthetic biology. Researchers at the Medical Research Council Laboratory of Molecular Biology in Britain reported on Wednesday that they had rewritten the DNA of the bacteria, E. coli, fashioning a synthetic genome 4 times larger and far more complex than any previously created. The bacteria are alive, though unusually shaped and reproducing slowly, but their cells operate according to a new set of biological rules, according to familiar proteins with a reconstructed genetic code. It's completely
the reconstructed genetic code. They did not synthesize life from non-life.
Yes,
they reconstructed
that's
DNA
exactly what that is.
No, it's not. They used life to create life. They used the genetic
it was not
code.
life.
They used the genetic code of living beings to create.
It was not a living thing. They used a code.
That's not what the article says. It said they took the building blocks was the genetic codes of existent life.
I guess the code. They did not use living, existing life. Oh, I can't.
They did. They did not create DNA from scratch. They took
They
DNA
took
from
the
other
code. They
organisms
did not
and
use.
spliced it.
Okay, the difference is they used information.
They did not create. They did
They
not
did not
create
use a
life
living
from non-life.
organism.
They
They did
created
not,
life from life.
but they did. They did
And
though.
then even so,
They used life as a model
no, and then
for
even so,
it.
it's just like a virus. They
It's not a
didn't.
virus. It's a bacteria. They're very
Well, I think
different.
it's like a virus that they didn't build the life from the DNA. They created the DNA and then they inserted the DNA into a living cell to produce the life. They didn't create life. They used life
They
to create more
created
life.
an individual
It's not
bacterial
abiogenesis.
genome. They created an individual living genome from a non-living.
I mean, I think you're playing. It's not a case of abiogenesis. They took genetic code. They modified the genetic code. They did not create the genetic code. They took existing genetic code from life and modified it, and then they did not use that genetic code to independently create life. They used that genetically code to reproduce within a pre-existing living cell.
Well, of course, if you're getting a
Well, of
recipe
course,
on how
because
to
they
make
can't
cake, you're
create
going to
life
use
from
the cake
non-life.
recipe. The thing is, we created it. Yes, we used the cake recipe, but we created it. A team of 17
But it's not
researchers has created the
abiogenesis.
largest man-made DNA structure by synthesizing and assembling the 582,970 base pair genome of a bacterium, Mycoplasma genitalium. This work published online, blah blah blah, online today.
It's just not
A
abiogenesis.
fully
Like I know,
synthetic organism.
yeah, I'm saying it's a great accomplishment, but it's not abiogenesis. It's still life from life.
It's not.
Oh,
They didn't use life though. They used the recipe for life.
they did use life. They didn't use chemicals and inorganic material. All of the material that they used was life.
It was not living. No.
Well, I'm saying they took
created
dead.
a life.
They used, maybe the cells were dead when they took them, but they used they didn't take non-living things and create living things. If you want to say, well, they took dead cells,
Okay,
but it's not a case of abiogenesis.
we're slipping back into semantics now. But
No, you're the one. You're trying to, like, it's your Mott and Bailey, where it's saying, yeah, they did some sort of accomplishment. However, it is nothing like abiogenesis. They took pre-existent DNA and they spliced it in a different fashion that made it code for something else. And then in order to create the E. coli, they inserted it into living cells in order to produce
they didn't insert it into a living cell though. That's an inaccurate sentence.
How did they turn the code into new E. coli? How did they turn? So I mean, they took pre-existing DNA and they spliced it into a new sequence, and then from that new sequence they produced a new modified E. coli.
A new completely man-made organism.
But
which goes. I mean, how do you account for that when all organisms, all life was started as is?
But
how do you account for that? How we created this? Yeah, no,
that's not a model for the origin of life. In saying from the cosmology of evolution, that at some point there was no living organisms, and you had chemicals, and then at some point those chemicals formed into organic materials, and those organic materials formed into life. That's the cosmology of evolution. That's abiogenesis. What happened here is not abiogenesis. This is still an example of life arising from life.
Excuse me.
I don't know why you're arguing on the point. I mean, it's clearly an example of life arising from life. It's not an example of what might have happened at the beginning of Earth when the first, because it necessitated the pre-existence of DNA. They didn't create DNA. They just rearranged existing DNA strands. They didn't create DNA.
Right. We took.
And then they didn't. They did. And then they used a living cell to have the DNA make proteins. They didn't create a cell. They created DNA, and then they inserted DNA into some sort of cell that coded the proteins, and then that formed the new cell. So it's not an example at all of abiogenesis.
Yeah, it's a synthetic strain of bacterium by definition.
But
It
it's not
absolutely
abiogenesis.
is.
So like it's synthetic, it's man-made, but it's not abiogenesis.
Partiality. Okay. I'm gonna let that one go, but I absolutely do not agree with you. But I don't think we're gonna go anywhere with it. I don't think it's gonna make any progress. I'll try and present more clear information for you with that. But I think that's a small point of where we're trying
I
to get
follow
at
this stuff.
here.
I'm saying like I'm certain that like abiogenesis does not happen. That no biologist, no evolutionist claims that it happened.
I think okay.
If you're talking about synthetic life or
What's your
genetic
next? Okay,
engineering,
what's your problem with evolution? What hole? What issue do you see?
from
Abiogenesis isn't necessary for defending evolution. We can move on beyond
well, the
that.
cosmology, evolution, that I said I believe that we were created as is. And if you're saying like no, I believe in evolution, in that we were not created, that we arose through natural processes, and that includes the natural process of um, atoms forming compounds that eventually form organic compounds that eventually form the precursors of life that eventually form life. So from the
That's a Big Bang
cosmology of
question. That's not an
evolution,
evolution question.
I'm not talking about the origins of the universe or planet. I'm talking about
No, but the origins of life have very much to do with that.
well, they're connected too. I mean, I don't agree with the Big Bang either, but I'm just talking about that life arose from non-life. At some point, there was no living thing, and then through natural processes, that life arose, and that what like the Miller experiment or the various theoretical explanations for how that could have happened. That I would call that like it's a belief. It's not a science. It's a cosmology. It's not something that has been demonstrated at all. There's like the example you gave is fascinating. It's a huge scientific development, but it's nowhere near the creation of life from non-life. It's the creation of life from life.
But all science is unknown until it's known. I mean, we all thought we revolved around the sun revolved around us. I mean, why are you discrediting an idea that has
Well,
an amazing amount of support of evidence to support it? Just an amazing amount, because there are gaps, because they don't fit into your ideology.
we're talking about the evidence for the cosmology, and so the question, like, how much evidence is there actually for the cosmology of evolution?
The
And then
evidence
you talk like the
of
fossil
species
record and
changing
very.
over time, yes, that's evidence to support it. If we accept evolution in just ignoring the cosmological aspect that you're thinking of, and we're just looking at it as the species ability and inevitable change over time due to what we know of evolution, why I lost my train of thought, sorry. My brain's frizzled.
Well, because it's really the modern Bailey fallacy of conflating the issue of the scientific aspects of evolution versus the cosmology of evolution. And so you say you strongly believe in the cosmology of evolution,
No,
and it might be based on evidence,
I
but
don't
it
strongly
doesn't mean the
believe in any
cosmology of
cosmology of
evolution is.
anything. I'm not going to try and presume or jump into assumptions of things I don't understand or things that science hasn't been able to grasp yet, because I can
So you admit to
imagine.
me it's unknown that science
Of
cannot.
course, there's unknown things about every branch of science. There's unknown. There's unknown math problems. There's unknown physics problems. There's unknown situations in anywhere you can look. We only know as much as we know. But to discredit something because of a gap of our own knowledge and throw away like everything we know and gathered to build up to what we know of as modern biology and evolution today is ridiculous. It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense to discredit something because of what are these gaps that you're mentioning?
Um, well, I would say there are metaphysical, theoretical problems with the.
Metaphysics doesn't have anything to do with biology.
Well, it does. I mean, that goes back even to the problem of
No, we're going to get
theology.
into this isn't
And
a
even
philosophical
to say
discussion.
that if I questioned that
Bas-
the metaphysical
Evolution is
parsimony
physics. It's
to
not
say that.
metaphysics. It's
Well,
physics.
even the points I was making about biology and the teleology and function, that scientifically you can't demonstrate how function arises from form. So say if biological
Right.
organs and organisms have a form, and so I want to say it was because they have some sort of vitalistic spirit to soul, something
Okay. But
non-spiritual.
because we can't define something, why are you going to fill it with any junk that you can find to fill it with? It doesn't make any sense. I can't fill this
Well, I'm
gap.
saying evolution's that junk. I mean, in my mind,
No,
evolution's that junk.
no. Okay, so we can't. Evolution cannot define for you or explain to you how life started or what created function or purpose, right? So you're throwing it away completely.
Well, I'm not throwing it away. I'm saying I have an alternative explanation. So if you're looking at the
What's your
explanatory power,
alternative explanation? Creationism.
well, a dualism, that there's an independent spiritual realm.
Creationism, I would say. I would call that.
Um,
Your
well,
idea is that
well,
this was
there's two
created
different.
by
I mean,
a supernatural figure.
creationism is a cosmology. So dualism is a current understanding. So without discussing a cosmology, just discussing a current understanding of how things operate, like a metaphysical parsimony, Occam's razor. So if you have a cell atomism and you're going to say that the various components of the cell serve a function, that is an unclear scientific statement. Even to scientifically, it's unclear how you scientifically claim that matter serves a function. And so if I use a dualistic understanding that the function that the matter serves is because it has some sort of spirit animating it, it's like, no, there's no spirit animating it, and it serves a function without a spirit animating it,
Well,
then
there's so many things
the burden of proof is upon you that function could derive from material. And especially like an independent function. So I think Joanna froze.
No, I'm here. Am I still frozen?
Okay, no, you're fine.
Sorry. No, I was thinking.
So
I
if
was
you're
just
thinking
frozen.
the example of a hammer, so like a hammer is meant to hammer things with, but a hammer is a tool to be used by other things. A hammer does not have an independent use other than would be used as a tool by other things.
We have many features, both
And so if you're
physical and
saying like,
behavioral, that have no function, that are remnants of previous stages in our ancestral line that served a function. That's why we have vestigial feature. We have so many vestigial features because of that. Not
yeah,
everything has a
I'm
function.
talking about just
Their
the
history.
pure. I'm talking about the problem of biology in general. So if you're looking like from physics, like an object doesn't have an independent purpose. So biological units have an independent purpose. They do something. And the question is,
Not old though. Some are just leftovers from the old remnants that we no longer use. Then that's the evolutionary evidence. We have
well,
lots.
even that's disputed. Like in a cell, I mean, there might be some vestigial elements, but like even in a cell,
Even in a cell, our
almost
cells
all
aren't even made of entirely what we were.
just a single cell organism or a single cell in the body has parts that all serve a function, like the cell walls, cell transport, mitochondria, protein transport, metabolism, that the cell works harmoniously for a purpose, and each of the various elements within the cell serve a purpose.
Okay, explain this then. I put the link in for you. So please explain to me how we were able to entrap a mitochondria of bacteria and then it turned into our powerhouse in every single cell that we have. How does that happen without evolution?
Well, it's a cosmology. It's not something scientific. You're saying we didn't. We're talking like historical cosmology. So you're not talking about something that happened in an experiment in a lab that I can
Historical
reproduce in my.
cosmology is an oxymoron.
You're not talking about something that I could reproduce in my own laboratory. This is talking about historical cosmological
So
explanation.
any historical evidence you're refuting based on that it's historical? Is that correct?
What I'm saying is not scientific. It's not something that I could
It's a
independently.
scientific article.
Well, it's in a scientific journal.
Well, read it.
Well, I mean, I don't
You
know if
could.
it's
I
going to
mean,
distract from the
you don't
stream
have to. Oh,
for
yeah,
me
but
to
you
read
don't
it
have to.
on
You
the
don't have to.
spot.
Sure,
But
but
I'm
I
just
mean,
just
there's
from what
lots
I
more.
see, it's an evolutionary explanation. It's not.
Why do you think
It's
people would? Why do people? Okay, if you think all this is wrong, they're making up stuff to try and fit some sort of evolution narrative. Why do they do this? Why? What's to gain from this?
well, it goes back to the morals and ethics.
Okay, why would people? What's to gain from creating all of this false scientific information,
I
leading
mean,
to
just on this
false
article, this is a
origin
hypothetical.
ideas and false cosmology? Like what's
But
why
just to
would
finish
people
up with
do that?
this article is just a hypothetical example of the origins of cell and cell function. Like the mitochondria conceivably could have developed independently out of the cell.
So why do
And
people? Why would people like playing with that enough to go through all this research and
well, as
take the
a
trouble to write this? Why would people do that?
well, I mean, from a religious perspective, and it's the first argument we had on Facebook was that as an excuse to engage in sinful behavior, to remove the yoke of your obligation to God from you. They're saying, like, Joanna, there is a God,
So you think
and
this
you must
material?
serve this God, and if you don't serve the God, you will be punished.
So you think
And
this
in the
material
sense,
was
so
created?
evolution serves the purpose to remove the yoke of your obligation to God from you.
So okay, this material was created just to pull people from their religious salvation. Correct? Is that
I
right?
don't understand what you're asking there.
No. So this type of material, this whatever assumptions that this bacteria, whatever they're saying that's in the past. Why do people create this material and pass it as scientific evidence? Why? What do they get from it? To pull people from religious, right? To give them permission to act badly, to act like animals, like you say. What does that actually do for the writer? Because the people that wrote this, they spent many hours, whether it's all bullshit or not, they spent many hours creating this content, right? Why would somebody spend so much of their time to create something to pull other people away from, to let other people act like animals? What do they gain from that? How do
Well, I
they
don't necessarily
why what would motivate them to create that?
without assuming nefarious motivations. I mean, they could legitimately believe it or be proposing an explanation.
Hmm.
I mean,
And why
I
is
I
this
could give a nefarious motivation, but it's not necessary. Saying, maybe they
just
altruistically
speculation?
really
Sure.
wanted to speculate about the nature of truth, and they want to know, and therefore they research things because they want to know the answers to the unanswerable questions.
Sure. And so when this information is posted in reputable scientific journals, research, everything's everything's posted and reviewable. Why? What? How do you decide what to discredit and what to? I know you're a man of science. I know you read
I'm
and
not
you appreciate science
discrediting.
and you're
I'm
scientifically
just
literate. Hold on, but why do you pick and choose? How do you decide what you believe and what you don't when they're all posted and peer reviewed and publicly accepted the same? How do you discredit this?
well, I didn't discredit.
Okay,
I'm just trying to um,
but how do you
actually
assume
fit
that it's
what genre, what uh, part, what it's saying. So if it's saying, because scientific is a broad term, like you could consider economic journals, psychological journals, sociological journals,
mhm,
um,
peer-reviewed
scientific.
science
You
journals?
could consider historical journals, like peer reviewed scientific. And then if you're looking
No, not
at
no. I mean, historical. You can't lump history and science
what
together
is, I'm
like
saying
that.
historical journals are also peer reviewed.
Right, but it's not verifiable in that you cannot test these hypotheses and reproduce the outcomes in your own lab, right? So in that sense, I don't think that it should be clumped together in that peer review stance because it's not science. You cannot repeat historical
Yeah, I
findings,
mean,
right? But you
so
can
what you were
science.
talking about in the origins of mitochondria,
Right, that
that's not something that could be repeated. Like, I mean, one
well
thing,
maybe
there's two
eventually.
levels that like you would need a expensive and extreme machinery for a
Mhm.
lot of these experiments. But if you're talking about a hypothetical cosmological explanation for the origins of cells, it's not an experiment. They're not writing an article. It's in a scientific peer-reviewed journal, but it's not an experiment. It's a hypothetical cosmological explanation for the origins of cell and living material. It's not an experiment that
What
could
about
be
all the active
conducted.
experiments though that are conducted just depicting evolution live? Do you want me
Well,
to
so I mean,
pull
just
some?
differentiating. So if you're differentiating between a cosmological explanation within so-called the science of evolution, that if you're a believer in the science of evolution, then you could put in a scientific journal a cosmological explanation of some sort of process that is not an experiment that could be replicated. It's just something using the mechanisms of evolution to explain
We no, we
the
can, but
cosmological origins of life, as
we can,
opposed to something that is actually a claim that could be independently verified and tested in a laboratory.
which we can do with fast reproducing bacteria
I
like
I
E.
know what you
coli.
can and can't do. So I was saying that there's countless studies, there's hundreds of thousands of papers written every year,
Mhm.
and some of them are repeatable studies that you could do in your laboratory, and some of them are hypothetical explanations using scientific processes to explain historical occurrences. And so just differentiating, the article that you showed appeared to be so the article about the E. coli was something that would technically be reproducible in a laboratory, and even possibly in my house, possibly with tens of thousands of dollars of equipment, I could
Sure.
splice my own DNA and create life in that way. What appeared that mitochondria was more a historical analysis, speculation about the origins of the cell. It wasn't something that I could actually independently test in my laboratory.
How do you think the okay? So we'll put that aside. How do you think the COVID changed then? Or do you accept that the COVID was changing through evolution? New strands appeared, developed.
I would say uncertainty, and like without like God forbid any theory about human manipulation, to
Hmm.
say it's possible that there were billions of variations of the original virus,
Oh, and then it was just discovered. The new ones were just discovered in
not
evolution.
discovered. It's just saying that there could have been a billion different variations of the virus, and that as the virus progressed, that the pre-existing variants became more dominant. That they didn't evolve through the process of mutation; they were all pre-existent. Um, but I wouldn't necessarily reject the basic what we'll call evolution, that there was mutation, and that the variants and where I forget the names offhand, but
Mhm.
the various spike mutations, or
Yeah,
what they called them, so as they evolved through mutation and natural selection. But I would say that that's unclear, because it's still possible that all of these were pre-existent, that they didn't evolve through mutations and natural selection. They
okay,
still could have been natural selection, but that all of the various strains were pre-existent, and none of
sure.
them
And then
evolved through
just
mutation. And that, from I say that you could estimate what's more likely, but you can't actually demonstrate that the various strains that became dominant were not pre-existent.
okay,
There's no way to actually disprove that all of
sure.
those various strains weren't
Like
not
there's no way
pre-existent.
to disprove God. Exactly. But I'm sorry, we're not going to get on that. Okay, antibiotic resistance. Antibiotic resistance. Okay, we'll put that away. Maybe these strains already existed. These COVID evolutions. Maybe they already existed. We just didn't know about it then. Sure. Antibiotic resistance. Why are so many people dying in nursing homes? Why can you not be admitted into a hospital without answering about any antibiotic-resistant bacteria that you've had.
Well, and God forbid people die from infectious disease, whether it's evolution that's the cause of it, or whether the forms are pre-existent, is beyond the scope of science to conclusively demonstrate.
How so? How is it beyond the scope of science to demonstrate? Because it's very, from my understanding, it's very demonstratable and witnessable.
We said to demonstrate that these new strains were not pre-existent.
Yeah, because we can do that in a controlled environment. We can actually manipulate this into happening, and we witness it happening in all sort of medical facilities.
Well, no, I mean the problem is because bacteria are single cell organisms, and when you have a culture of bacteria, I don't even know if theoretically. If I said theoretically, you can't take a culture of bacteria and isolate every single bacteria and sequence every single one of them to demonstrate
And you can
that
start with a single.
it wasn't pre-existent.
You can start with a. I mean, do you believe in our ability to sterilize situations?
Well, I mentioned that, but I'm
Sterilize
saying in terms,
material or working
I
space.
mean, God forbid, my mother suffers
sterilize
from.
and start with a single cell and isolate that cell
Well, I
and
mentioned
just
that.
study the offspring of that cell.
I mentioned that. So in terms
Exactly.
of
We can
biomedical
witness
research,
that,
you
though.
could show. I have to look at the exact state. If they do start with a single cell and culture it, and could conclusively demonstrate that the new strain rose through mutation process. But even to show, like, you can't conclusively show that it rose through a mutation process. You could just
So okay, but whatever word you want to call it, we can say you can say like, oh, it's a mutation process, but we can see that an organism changed into another organism is completely isolated, and we know all the variables affecting it. I mean, not all, we can't know all variables for everything, but we can do this and witness it in a completely isolated environment. And you can do absolutely what you say you can't do.
Well, I'm
I
saying
have a question
you're
here.
trying to sell me evolution as opposed
I'm not
to
trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to
just
explain.
examining what we can or can't do. So, like, I'm happy to, like, like, without saying what can or we can't do. And
What do you
so
mean? Okay. I
in
guess
an
it all.
isolated lab example, you could culture from a single cell, and the presumption is that the cell, if it replicates properly, that it would be the exact identical cell. And that's why we have the numbers that said, like, for like the 1 out of 10,000, or the various mutation numbers that we expect, but we can't actually isolate that it occurred through a mutation. You could take a single culture of a cell and you could let it duplicate, and then
No, you can run the genetic sequence and then you can see the genetic change. You can isolate the exact gene that changed.
But that's post hoc. You can't demonstrate that it happened through a mutation. You could just show that the new
It's
variant.
post hoc. You can't. Okay, because you're saying that we can.
You can't observe the mutation. Or just put it in that term. You can't actually observe the mutation. You can only post hoc
How
see
do
that
you
it
refute
changed.
this? You can't observe.
You can't.
Most of
Are
what
you claiming that you
your
can't observe
religious
the mutation?
ideology, though.
Are you claiming that you can't observe the mutation?
Yes. Okay. Hold on.
I mean, it would just agree with me that you can't actually observe the mutation. It's post hoc that you have
What do you mean
after the
observe?
replication. You genetically
Observe the mutation. Can you please detail what you mean by that? Because we can observe we can look at bacteria and we can sequence the DNA. We can
you
look at
can't
the
observe.
offspring
You can't
of that.
observe it mutating. You could observe that a mutation occurred, but you can't observe the actual mutation taking place.
Okay, but you can't observe the electricity going from your light switch to your light bulb, but we know what happens because one step we follow the first step and then we follow the results. Why does that logic discredit anything?
No,
How?
I think in a laboratory you could.
How does
So
that
say
discredit
observe.
anything?
You could observe the electricity going from.
How? We're not
When
there
you're
yet.
talking,
Someday, probably. But how can we observe?
if,
Can we see it from your light sockets yet? The light
well, I can't
actually
in my
going.
house, but you're saying in
But
an
I'm saying
experiment in a
exactly. We don't.
laboratory.
No, but we don't have the ability to do that. With our, even if we could make it completely translucent, the light switch, and make it visible,
You'd
the
have to
electricity
well define it.
our brains aren't going fast enough to
I'm an
perceive that
engineer and a
information.
scientist.
No,
I'm an
but
engineer
our
and a
brains aren't
scientist,
able
so
to perceive that, to discredit something that we can't see the actual happening of that. You're an engineer.
I'm an
You
engineer and a science. So if you're talking about an experiment, it means you have to break it down into discrete components and have
It
well
is.
defined.
It is.
So
The
if you're
light turns
talking,
on and then the light turns on. You flip the switch and the light turns on. Very clear components. Because you can't see the electricity moving from light switch to light. It does not
I
describe.
mean, you mean see like with my eye,
Yes,
or where,
exactly. That's what you're saying with the
wh-
genetic change. See with your eye, right?
well,
How
no,
is
I'm
it
saying, but
different?
no, I'm saying you can, like the electricity, you could experimentally observe the flow of electrons. You
So
can't
you
see with your eye, but you could experimentally see the flow of electrons, as opposed to the mutation. You can't see the mutation
okay?
taking place. You could
And there
only
was a
measure
point in time,
the mutation after it's already occurred.
and there was a point in time we could
You
not
can't actually
measure
observe the
electrons between
mutation.
light either, right? But because we couldn't do that before, doesn't mean it didn't exist, right? You cannot discredit base knowledge of what we gather
Yeah,
just
I
because
know your
there's
point.
pieces
So
missing.
if you're claiming that eventually we're going to be able to observe it, saying this is the current state of science, there's no dispute among any evolutionist or scientist that you cannot currently observe the process of a mutation. You could only measure it
Why
after
does
it's
it need
already
to be
occurred.
observable? Why you
I
see
did it because
incumbent
there's
and outcome,
alternative
input,
explanations.
input and output. I
But
mean,
maybe saying because the reason why you're saying what's observable and what's not,
no, but this input and output
and then to claim that
is okay
that
for
there
so
could
many
be an
other
alternative
fields.
explanation, and until the phenomenon
But
is
here,
observable, you can't rule out alternative explanations.
okay, so I can't rule out the alternative explanation that dwarfs don't carry the magical light from your
Yeah,
switch to
maybe
your
now you're
light.
just talking nonsense
No,
because
it's not nonsense because what you're
I'm talking
feeling,
about
the
things
gap
that
is it could
evolutionary
be filled with
scientists
the
agree
exact
about.
same gap.
I'm not giving like stipulation, speculation. I'm talking about things that evolutionary biologists agree upon. Experimental evolutionary biologists agree that you could read evolutionary journals and they would agree
Where are you
that,
gonna? What field? Show me any field where you can get any specialists to agree simultaneously. Show me any field.
well, there's always levels of disagreement. So that none of them are going to claim the level of science observability measurement that currently exists. That you can't observe DNA replication, like there's no microscope, there's no way to observe DNA replication at the level to see a point mutation. You have to measure it afterwards.
Why is that discounted from reliability?
What I said, so the point is, do we know that? So we were talking about the virus or bacteria, and saying, do we know that the virus adapted due to evolution? And I say no, because we can't actually observe the point mutation.
Okay, here's a close-up look of DNA replication. Scientists have been able to watch individual steps in the replication of single DNA molecule with some surprising findings. For one thing, there's a lot more randomness at work than has been thought. I actually went to the bathroom again. I'll leave you that. Go ahead and answer questions. I've got a couple questions that my chat wants you to answer. I'll be right back. 1 second. Sorry about that.
I'll look in the
1 minute.
I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble playing this video. I've showed this video before, and this is a computer generated model. It's not like a, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for playing this video. And I've actually seen this. I think I have, no, I don't have this video like, but I've seen these type videos, but this is a computer generated model of a hypothetical, explanation of what might occur in a cell. But if you're talking about actually observing a point mutation happening and then saying, yeah, it might be the most likely thing that happens. I don't know if anyone Joanna's chat, I don't know if they're, we've been going a while, so I even said we have, we've been going over 2 hours, and we'd even have like a guest. I'll put the link in the chat. So I don't know how long Joanna wants to go, because I could probably just argue straight with Joanna about this for hours and hours, like let alone if we're going to take questions. So definitely didn't see any super chats. And I haven't seen any @Doovids in my chat. That if someone had like an @Doovid, I mean, you're happy to just chat with each other, or you'll be active in the chat. But yeah, I don't know if Joanna's like, so to say, trying to sell me on evolution versus just come to agreement about what's the state of science. What do we currently know about science? How much is knowable? And then to differentiate between the level of the theory of even the theory that evolution is the process that is occurring in the petri dish with bacteria or viruses. And so even at that level, there's uncertainty. So if you want to look like probability, it's highly likely that it's point mutations that are occurring. And so like the point I was making about, God forbid my mother like has yeast infections, God forbid. And, like they're constantly changing, and, God forbid, there's all sorts of immunology and sicknesses that people go through and would have to use, and you could use as an explanatory method the theory of evolution to explain what's happening versus saying a clear scientific demonstration that that's what occurred. And so, like a post hoc, if you want to say, well, do we know that mutations occur? And so we could say, well, something changed. We did a genetic sequence before, and we took a single cell and grew a culture from that single cell, and now we have different genetic sequences, and the most likely that you have a point mutation that occurred, but you say you can't actually observe a point mutation. And that's in a laboratory. So if you're just talking about what happens that can be demonstrated in a petri dish in a laboratory versus medical science, where you're talking about infectious disease and immunology, where you know that the strain that is what now the dominant strain, that you had some form of cure antidote that was killing off the infectious bacteria. Now there's a new bacteria, so to say. Is it new that is now resistant to the antibiotic? So the claim from evolutionary would be that it evolved, that it wasn't in pre-existence, and that through point mutations in the evolutionary process, that what is currently now is a new species through the process of point mutations and evolution. That there's an alternative hypothesis that other strain that's now dominant was pre-existent. And so that's just the point I'm making, that there's uncertainty, and that the scientific method at this point has not been able to rule out alternative hypotheses and explanations. And so if you're going to say that a lot of physicists, that's the reductionism of biology to chemistry to physics, that we will never be able to observe a point mutation. There's certain technological limitations to the smallness of DNA. You're talking a point mutation, you're talking about something that has tens of atoms. Like a point mutation, you're talking about a difference in single atoms, and that there is no technology that will ever be able to witness a point mutation. And so, well, how can so how do you know what you know at the level of science? Do you actually have to be able to witness a point mutation to know that they happen? And I guess if Joanna's back, I'm not sure how much time you want to invest on it. Like if you saw Week in Review, me and Jennifer go for like 5 hours every week for years, on this type stuff. But if you want to wrap it up or move towards conclusion, or you want to keep on talking to these issues, or you want to get back to the morals and ethics, because that's also a very important topic of my understanding of moral ethics. I'm not sure if are you muted, because if you're talking, I haven't heard you.
Oh, sorry. My issue is that we can't watch it in progress, so we cannot take it as serious evidence. We would not be able to convict any
using the word evidence
murderers if this was the logic we used. We wouldn't be able
because
to
you're mixing up terms for evidence versus
witness. Well,
saying that, okay, there's evidence, there's strong evidence for, and so I'm not rejecting that there's strong evidence, but the question is, do we know, and are there still alternative hypotheses? And you might convict a murderer, you might like in law, or legality, and to say, well, there's still alternative hypothesis. How reasonable are the alternative hypothesis
Mhm.
versus having proven something conclusively? And
Sure.
here we're just talking about the only known case of observable evolution, which is in bacteria. So I'm saying
No,
even in
it's
the
not.
only known.
I listed five observable options that aren't bacteria or microorganisms. But yeah, we have to rely on a lot of evidence that we cannot currently witness, like fossil records. But that's how we gain information as a species. That's how we build scientific truth and information to for our future to build off of. Is we build off of our previous pioneers. Yeah, I don't think we're gonna reach any sort of conclusion here.
Well,
Go
I was
ahead and
saying,
wrap it
I mean,
up.
it's a huge debate, and saying like it's not like you're telling me
Yeah.
this for the first time.
No,
I've been
no.
researching this my whole adult life, and like I got a whole shelf of evolution books on my shelf.
Right.
So it's
I've
not like
just
it's not like I haven't looked at in but yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation. So people watching, um, what's knowable, what's uncertain, how to examine the issue. I mean, we could put a bookmark in it, but maybe before we move to concluding remarks, to look at the moral and ethical points. And
sure.
my main point on that is, from my spiritual understanding, morals and ethics is an event that doesn't occur in the material realm. So to say that if, God forbid, a person murders, rapes, kills, steals,
Hmm.
that the goodness or badness of the event did not occur in the material realm. There's no material marker that marks that are good or bad. It's something that is marked in the spiritual realm. And if you're looking like reward or punishment, in the sense, my interpretation of the Buddhist phrase, "If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it make a sound?" Like, to put, God forbid, if someone kills a person and there's no evidence and they feel no remorse, do they get away with it? And God forbid, in any of these, like, it could be any, the major crimes, murder, rape, stealing. If a
Okay.
person commits one of these
So
horrible crimes and there's no evidence
lack of
and they
remorse
feel.
for that is clinically diagnosed as a mental ailment, right? Because we evolved this innate innate urge not to hurt people. That's how we worked cooperatively and helped our
Well,
species
I'm
survive.
making the point about the problem with materialism or evolution. So to say, like, if a tree falls in the forest, did no one hear it? So if a person commits one of these horrible crimes, has no remorse, and there's no evidence, did they get away with it? And so, say, from a material explanation, is like, well, yeah, they got away with it. As opposed to spiritual, saying like, no, there was a spiritual imprint that recorded the event, and there's such a thing as karma, action, reaction,
Mhm.
and that either there's some sort of record of the event that doesn't exist in the material
I
realm
think that's just
that will
wishful
come
thinking.
back into
Like you're
existence,
hoping.
or there's punishment, some form of supernatural punishment.
Exactly. I mean, it's wishful thinking. Of course, if you're in the playground and the bully throws a rock at your face, you're going to hope the teacher sees you, and the teacher's going to reprimand that. But that doesn't mean. I love how you like stare off. I feel so. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Continue.
Well, that's my main point on morals and
Okay.
ethics. I would argue that you can't derive a moral ethical system, and you can't even answer the question, what's wrong with killing people, in a
What's
simple,
wrong with killing
without a
people?
spiritual explanation, that you can't.
Innately, no, it's physiological, it's evolutionary, it's biologically explainable. You don't need spirituality, you don't need religion to understand or even feel the innate need not to kill people. It's evolutionary. It's we survived because of this, because of our need to help people and not hurt people. When we hurt people, we feel an innate sense of guilt. Most people, psychologically, there are of course abnormalities in any species and any characteristic that you're talking about, pretty much, right? There's of course sociopaths that
Exactly, like the
don't have
psychopaths.
right.
One
There's
out of
there's
50
of
people
course
are psychopaths.
of course
So
there's sociopaths that do not have the same reaction, but for a normal
what,
pop,
what's to
the
prevent what's
average
to prevent the
the
sociopaths
average
from having an adaptive advantage,
the
and then the
because
world becoming all sociopaths?
because cooperation is beneficial to our survival. in our existence. That's what gives us the benefit
I mean,
over
temporarily,
that's why
that's what
psychopaths
led.
are way less likely, way less prominent than what we consider non-psychopath, right?
And
They're
there's
a much
theories, the
smaller fraction,
origins of psychopathy, but
right?
just like the petri dish, let's
But no,
postulate from an evolutionary perspective that
evolutionary. No, let's postulate. No, okay.
psychopathy is an
We
evolutionary
see this in all
adaptation.
species. We see this in so many species, though, especially primates. We see even in
Psychopathy is an
crows.
evolutionary adaptation, and in the future, through natural selection, eventually psychopaths will win out, and everyone will be a psychopath. So evolutionary,
Where
that's
is this?
possible. Evolutionary, that's possible.
Who says this? No, because you're losing the cooperation aspect of evolution that psychopaths are missing. There, it's a
There's no
disadvantage. It's a
there's no evolutionary dogma that cooperation is good. You're saying that
Yes, psychopaths are
cooperation.
less likely to reproduce, making them less prominent in the population.
No, I mean, but God forbid we see through the animal
That's all it
kingdom.
is.
We
It's
see that
only their
many species,
characteristics that increase your fitness
rape
and
is the
your
method of
ability.
reproduction. We
What?
see that in many species that rape is the most common form of reproduction.
Right, and in lots of
And you say, okay,
populations,
well, in
that
humans,
is a successfully viable
even in
option.
some mammals,
Humans, it's not right. We've created an environment
we
where
didn't
that's
create.
not.
That's
No,
an
we did. We did.
anthropomorphization.
We
No,
created
it's not a
an
we,
environment. No, we absolutely
but
did.
you're not
It's an
talking
artificially
evolutionary.
created environment
No,
in
but
which we have denounced rape as an acceptable form, right? If somebody does rape, they're socially attacked. They're cast out either by prison or social exclusion. They're socially excluded in some way, right? It is it's a social environment that we've created to exclude that out of social acceptance and social norm.
well, I
It's
mean, there are two
a form.
questions. One to say whether that's a universal human norm,
It's
or
not.
whether
It's cultural.
what I'm saying is cultural. Whether you say that no, I mean, not all people, not all societies act in that manner. And currently, there's a battle of natural selection
It's
going
cult.
on between the rapists and the
Okay.
non-rapists.
It's culture in the
And
sense that how people handle it
there's
is
no
differently.
reason evolutionary that the rapist shouldn't win out over the non-rapists.
Because of our evolved innate need to cooperate with each other. When somebody is hurt, we have an innate desire to help that person. When somebody's being hurt by another one, and this happens in
You're using an
primates, in all
unscientific
primates.
we. You're using an unscientific we. You're using spiritual terminology.
How?
Evolutionary, there is no unscientific collective we. Spiritually, there's a collective we. So evolutionary, there's no we. There's individual animals. There could be mutations.
How did
There's
okay?
different
What
strains
exactly
among
did I say?
humans
What we did I say that
some
bothered you?
humans maybe have evolved collectively. Some humans haven't. And to say like even psychopathy, if psychopathy is
What
a
we did I say that
you're
bothered
talking,
you?
you said we as a collective humanity. It's
No, but
not
what
a
exactly did I
technical
say?
scientific term. That's a spiritual term.
What
Evolutionary, there is no collective we. There's just genetics that
there's a
predispose,
collective
and there could
we in
be.
so many in so many contexts. Collective we is not
How,
exclusive to religion
I mean,
at all. Collective
how do you, what is the collective we from an evolutionary point of view, genetic point of view? You're
collective
saying the collective we is just the shared genetics.
collective we.
I mean, if there's a collective we between me, you, and any other person on the planet, it's
Yes,
just
the
our shared
collective.
genetics.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
saying through evolution, someone could have a changed genetics. That would mean that they
Of
no
course,
longer
there's
have
the
the
trade
collective
traits,
we.
not
That this
trade
collective we we're talking
traits.
about doesn't apply to somebody if their genetics changes or adapts. And so the psychopath, there is no collective we in that sense between me, you, and the psychopath.
There's always exceptions to norms, regardless if we're talking
So
about
you just use
humans
the
or any
collective we
species.
of humanity to exclude the psychopath. However, the
What
psychopath is part of
sentence did I
humanity.
use collective we with exactly?
Where you're talking about
No,
cooperation.
exactly. What sentence did I say? How did I? What did exactly did I say?
You said we have evolved
As a
cooperation.
human, as in a human species. I'm talking about we as a human species.
Yeah, but you're clearly incorrect because the psychopath doesn't use cooperation.
There's exceptions to every norm. You can talk about.
So it's not a collective we if there's an exception of the psychopath.
There's not a collective anything then if you're looking at it in that context. In the logic that you're using and the way you're discrediting what I said, there's not a collective we in anything.
Is there such a
I can
thing that good
argue
and bad? Can you say there's just
anything.
adaptive and not adaptive? Is there good and bad? You say is murder or rape bad or is just not adaptive?
It's not helpful in survival.
Well, you're saying that currently it's not helpful in survival. It was helpful in survival, then that would be the norm. It's only because
Yeah,
it's not that it's good or bad. There's no
exactly.
way for you
No,
from an evolutionary point of view.
it's not
Good
good
or
or
bad is
bad. It's
defined by
whether it
adaptive.
increases your ability to survive and reproduce. That is it. It's not good or bad. It is if it increases your survivability. That's all.
Yeah, so to say, God forbid, from an evolutionary perspective, if murdering and raping was more adaptive,
If it
that
was
would be
helpful,
so to
yes, it
say
would
be
increase.
good.
If there was let's say there was a population of humans, half of those humans were murderous, half of the other half were not. If the murderous humans could somehow take their murdering ability and that made them survive, then eventually the majority of the population would be murderers. That's how evolution works.
And that could be the case. They're saying even from an evolutionary perspective, uh, anthropological perspective, it could be that rape was the normal method of reproduction
It was
going back
time.
less than like 5,000 years ago. Prior to 5,000 years ago, that rape was the norm method of reproduction.
But also rape, the way that we view rape is different culturally. That's why I say it depends on the culture. It's not rape isn't necessarily bad in every culture. It's a normal part of reproductive rights or whatever situation
Well,
that
so
you
where
might
did
find in that culture. But hurting somebody instinctively, we're talking about hurting someone. In some cultures, rape isn't considered hurting somebody, but actually violently, like murdering someone instinctively, is really difficult for an average person to do without some sort of psychological abnormality. And those psychological abnormalities, like wanting to murder, are abnormalities because they do not help us survive. Because the people that have been surviving and the good do-gooders that don't want to murder people are the majority of the population, right? So they're reproducing those same genes, and these genetic factors are in fact genetic. Your predisposition to anger, to homicide, to all sorts of things, anxiety, they're genetically passed on to you, right? If it was a helpful trait, the majority of us would be murderers.
Well, so I mean, ironically, the societies where rape and murder are less common actually are more dysgenic, have less children. So if you look like globally around, like even
Like
so,
examples, I haven't heard any of this. What are
um,
some examples of that?
what you could have per capita numbers of uh, your murder and rape. So if you say your average in like I don't know if you want to use the term first world nations,
Mm-hmm.
that one out of 300 people will commit a murder in their lifetime. But the number is as high as like 1 out of 30 or 40 in some places. So maybe
Maybe
Mexico, South America,
how different is the
Africa.
judicial system in those countries? So there's just too many variables to really like that. That information means nothing to me because there's too
Well, I
many
mean, if you're going to
variables to
give
really for it to be credit. Like there's nothing. I mean,
you'd
how
have to, if you're claiming some form of universal humanism, which is unclear, evolutionary, and
humanism? No, I'm not claiming humanism. I'm claiming a remorseful reaction to hurting other people, which is found in many species.
what is it found universally in many species, or saying that's selectively found that in most species you
It's
have
found in. It's not universally
remorseful
found in
behavior is
species.
the norm
It's absolutely not
among.
found in universal. It's found in most primates. It's found in lots of species, and the
Yeah, I
reason
mean, even like dogs, maybe cats, maybe even you could even find like reptiles, or various things that you might have
reptiles, no, it's a little
some
dicey.
aspect. But it's like even in humans, remorse is not universal even in humans. If you want to say it's abnormal,
Nothing
so
is universal in humans. Nothing. I
well,
mean,
yeah, so
except for
that's
the need to consume air,
so
food,
if you're giving an evolutionary,
sleep.
you would just have like I said, like among the bacteria, where all these pre-existent. So currently now, lack of remorse is maybe like sociopaths, psychopaths, that estimated about 1 out of 50 people. And although not all psychopaths, sociopaths kill people, that they wouldn't feel, if they did, they wouldn't feel remorse for it. And depending on how you give the numbers, so if statistically on average, like
But people are
one
broken
out of
in so many
200
ways. Some
people.
people don't feel pain. Like that's not an except. Like there's exceptions to every rule.
Yeah, but I mean, these are genetically determined in their current variance in the population. So if you're saying
Mhm.
if you think that psychopathy is genetic or you think it's socially determined, and
I think it
if
can
it
be
is,
both. I
if it,
think
if it
it can
is, I
be
mean, so you look
environmentally. I think it can be environmentally induced and genetically
scientifically, just break
exposed.
it down. We have these numbers where you're like 1 out of 100 people will kill a person in their lifetime. You maybe rape, God forbid, 1 out of 20, maybe less. 1 out of 20 people, God forbid, could be 1 out of 10 people will rape a person in their lifetime, or at least 1 out of 10 males will rape a person in their lifetime. 1 out of 100 males, if you're just reducing it to males, maybe even 1 out of 50 males will kill a person during their lifetime. So I don't. I
Hmm.
may have to look on the exact numbers. There's studies, but I
And
mean,
that's
would
a,
that
well, that's
would you agree that the number would come down to maybe 1 out of 10 males? But God forbid, it could even be worse. Maybe
it
one
could
out
be
of five
worse.
males will
Hmm.
rape a person in their lifetime, and 1 out of 30 males will kill a person in their
Um,
lifetime.
no, and you know what? I think a large portion of that number aren't examples of people lacking this innate intention or desire what
We're
they
saying
call
that it's not
the
because they're
golden rule. I'm
genetically
going to
good.
call it. I'm going to call it the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated, right? I think these examples aren't necessarily disqualifying them of having this innate golden rule instilled with them without
I mean, it's
religion.
funny you
It's
mentioned the
that
golden rule because the
no,
golden
because
rule is universal among religions.
the
That
golden rule is something
that
that I learned without
the
religion.
golden rule
Okay.
derives from religion.
Okay. No. Okay.
And it's saying
Anyways,
it derives from the concept of people having
so many
souls
things come from
in an
religion.
innate.
It
The
doesn't.
reason
It
why
doesn't.
the golden rule exists, like even murder in the Bible,
It's
the
man
reason
made.
you shouldn't
Anyways,
kill somebody is
it's
because they have a soul. They were created in the image of God,
listen.
and that's the question. So in the Bible, the logic when you say "Thou shalt not kill," it's explicitly written because the person was created in the image of God. So from an
Okay.
evolutionary perspective, you can't derive this rule "thou shalt not kill" because you don't have because the person has a soul, because the person
There's too
was
many. No,
created. So it's
that
just
kind of count.
adaptive. If it's adaptive to kill, there's no reason you should tell a person they shouldn't kill evolutionary.
Sometimes physiological urges outweigh others. Correct. Like all this rape instinct does not mean that they did not have this innate urge to treat people as they want to be treated or to not hurt people. Is that they had a louder biological urge, which is I need to reproduce. I'm horny. I want to screw. And that was louder than their innate urge to not hurt somebody. Right? This happens. We have loud urges. We get hangry because we're hungry. We get rude. We get other urges can be louder than others, and they can interfere with other biological.
Well, it comes back to consciousness. So my model of understanding is the battle between the animalistic body urges and the immaterial soul. So
Mhm.
that my body constantly sends me signals to behave like an animal. So my body constantly sends
You are
me
an
like,
animal. Why do you think you're not?
well, because I am not my
This I
body.
want to.
I am my body is an animal. I am not my body. I'm my soul, and my soul is immaterial, and my soul has the ability to control my body. So that's my
That's
conception. That's why I'm a spiritual person, because I do not believe I'm my body. I believe I'm my soul.
I
So if you're
believe.
an evolutionist,
Yeah,
you
I don't believe
disagree.
in a soul.
You think that you are your body, that you don't have a soul,
Right.
and that the I, whoever
Consciousness
that I
is a
is a
biological.
derivative product of your body.
Hmm.
So
It's a
we have a
it's a
different
it's a
worldview.
result of biological interactions and
So
chemistry
when I
that's
say
going on in your
I'm
body.
referring to my immortal soul, and
Yeah,
when you say I, you're referring to your body.
myself. Yes, my consciousness, myself, my physical body, however you want to determine it. But yes, I don't believe in at least the way you do it of a soul. I believe consciousness is a collection of biological and chemical reactions in your body, and that's the result. And yes, we can't fully explain every aspect of that, but we're getting closer every
Well, that's
consistently.
my point about morals and ethics. That from my common like spiritual dualistic worldview of a differentiation of body and soul, that it's easy to derive morals and ethics. From your worldview, it's very difficult, and I argue impossible, to derive morals and ethics.
No, of course not. Why? Why? Okay, please explain. Why is it impossible or very difficult for me to derive ethics from my?
Right, I just gave the example
But
of
why? No,
absolute. So you are stuck to utilitarian explanations. So it's saying when I say thou shalt not kill, it's absolute because the Bible says because
hmm
man was created in the image of God and has an immaterial soul, you don't have the right to take another person's life. It's an
Wait,
absolute bad.
how many
Because the
religious?
person is created in the image of God, you're forbidden to kill them.
But how
It
many
is
religious
it
people
is
murder
dependent.
people
It is
every day
dependent.
under
What
God?
what now
How
you're
many
giving
people
it.
went in God's name? Like, I had to kill him because God told
What
me to.
that's a
John
theology.
Lennon, you just posted the Beatles on your thing. John Lennon was murdered because he made this statement, I'm more popular than Jesus. So some religious ideology came in, like, I have to kill this person, right? He was doing that in God's name. Under God's ethics,
Yeah,
under God's moral
it might
compass.
get too veered off topic, but it's saying, yeah, there's spiritual
Well,
explanations
you're going there
for why
first. I'm
people have free
following.
will. That people aren't uh, stopped from carrying out bad acts. They're commanded to. So I'm commanded not to
People don't
murder.
need that,
However,
though. No.
I have the free will to then my immortal soul would be punished for it. So
I don't
because
need that. People don't need that. People don't need the threat of eternal damnation or
yeah, I mean you're
punishment
preaching
to
now.
treat
I'm just trying
people.
to I'm trying to talk about uh, the worldview foundation. That I mean that you could ask questions on the worldview, but just saying that the derivation of morality is because there's a soul and all people have souls, and one day I will die and stand judgment before God, or within the spiritual realm, there is action
This
reaction. That if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, I mean, if I commit a crime and there's no
this is
witnesses, there's a spiritual force that will punish me for it,
right.
even though I got away with it
hmm
temporarily.
This is
So
why I
that
believe
is
religion was
derivative of a
invented and why it's
spiritual dualistic
successful.
worldview. So I'm asking, put it on you from your
hmm
materialistic, non-spiritualistic worldview. How do you derive morals and ethics, even the
How do
most
I? Okay.
fundamental, like
Yeah. Okay. So
that you shouldn't kill?
it's an innate piece of knowledge. It's innate. You don't want to harm other people. If I were to go kill somebody, just what for whatever reason,
What were you
that
saying?
would
You were
haunt
going to
me.
speak for yourself. You saying I don't want to harm people, but maybe there's someone else who does. Why
Well,
shouldn't they
this
do
is
it?
why I think
So
we
you're
don't
saying you don't
let
want to, but saying
everyone's
God forbid, maybe I want to.
murder.
Speak for
This
yourself.
okay, and maybe some people need the threat of eternal damnation to not murder, and that terrifies me. This argument terrifies me, honestly. The
Well,
fact
that's
that
what I'm
people
giving it. I
need
think it's one of the
some
strongest
sort of
arguments against evolution.
no, I think it's the strongest argument against creationism. I think it is why it was created. It is a method to very similar to, okay, kids, you're not going to behave. You're not going to get presents for Santa, but crueler, much crueler, right? You're going to act bad, then you will be punished for life, for eternity, way worse than life, right? Why do you need that threat to not hurt people? Why? Why do you need how
Because if hurting
would you
people is
hurt people?
advantageous,
Would you
if
kill
hurting people,
somebody? Would you kill somebody if you knew you could get away with it?
what was that? Well, let's say, God forbid, I would kill somebody in self-defense to protect
Of
myself
yeah. Well,
or the innocent.
let's put that aside. Let's put that
Let's just say
those
that's
fine.
my personal belief system. But just theoretically, why shouldn't a person hurt other people for their own advantage? From evolution, so without some spiritual, because there's a God, because there's karma reaction, that
In
because
what
it's going to
way?
come
Okay,
back.
give me an
But so
example.
why shouldn't a
Can you give me a
person be? Why?
specific
What
example?
reason? Well, let's just say, stealing. You
hmm
have something that I want, and why shouldn't I just take it so I have it?
hmm
What reason is there that I shouldn't just take what I want?
because you're
I mean, we
looking
think in the animal kingdom,
because you're
like
an
there's law. I have my
emotional,
old house.
empathetic.
Everything in this house is my possession, and if someone took it, it would be against the law. In the animal kingdom, there's not really such a phenomenon. There is no such thing as
Yes,
like
there is.
possessions.
Of
People
course
just
there is. No, there is. There absolutely is. There's tools, there's possessions, there's skill, there's more, there's social code, there's conduct, there's hierarchy. There's so many. So these social constructs are found in so many different species besides us.
well, I
Really,
mean,
it is.
Well, not in the sense that we consider my ownership of property
Okay,
in
okay. Well, let's throw away all this innate stuff. Like maybe we weren't born with this
but,
innate desire. Because maybe we'll,
like, I mean, God forbid, like, forget murder and rape, and let's focus on something smaller like stealing. Like like you could agree from a certain perspective, like stealing is an extremely advantageous thing to do.
we
If you
socially
have
developed a
if
system
someone
where
else has something that I don't, it would be advantageous for me to just take it and then I would have it.
right, but then okay, another advantage because that doesn't help for a cooperative, smooth running society, is that we created social constructs to prevent that, as do many animal species. When a bonobo steals something from another bonobo, the the whole tribe can get in lots of primates.
What's a bonobo? You're saying some sort of primate
Yeah,
has
lots of
something against stealing?
no, but lots of the thing is we create a social system where we're our own justice. We don't need a supernatural God Almighty going
Is
to
there an
punish us
exist?
afterwards
Are
because
you
we
claiming there's an example?
we socially ostracize wrongdoing, right? We do that. We've been doing that forever. When someone wrong does somebody, other people jump up
Well, no, we've
and
only been doing that since the advent of religion. The origin of this
no,
is religion
no,
and revelation. There's no evidence
no. There's
of
examples of
any
doing
of this
that
other than
without
religious
religion.
law.
I can tell
So,
you,
like, thou shalt not kill. It's in the Bible. That,
I played and grew up with many non-religious people with the same innate
but
reactions.
saying, but they derive the rule from religion. It's unclear that.
Where does the religion derive from? People. People create this shit.
I mean, well, I
Excuse
mean,
me.
that's your evolutionary explanation. Say no, it derived from
You don't
revelation
think religion
from
is
God.
man-made, even if it's to respect
No,
some
man,
sort
I'm
of
a
almighty
believer. Like
whatever?
that's saying from your evolutionary perspective.
Right, but
Yes,
the
but
religion
no, I mean,
to
I'm a believer. Like I believe in a
no, of
spiritual
course
realm.
you're. I'm saying
Religion
in that
derives from the
context.
non-material realm.
In that context, religion was created by people to worship this deity. It was still man-made, even in your context.
Well, even if without talking about like a deity and worship, you just talk about what I will call karma, spiritual laws of action reaction. I mean, it's saying that there's a spiritual force that if you steal, it's going to come about bad for you because of karmatic laws of action reaction.
It's not karma. People will jump on that. People will do things wrong. People want to stick up for people that are underdogs. It's a natural instinct, and that's what helps us survive. We cooperate and we help each other when we're down. You know what is the first example of civilization?
Yeah, but you're
You know what
preaching.
the first example
You're
of
preaching. You're
civilization is?
preaching in a
It is
non-evolutionary manner.
the
You're preaching in a
first
non-evolutionary
healed
manner.
the first healed femur. No, this is because this
No,
has to do
because
with ethics and morality. This has to do with ethics and morality. Okay, you're preaching too, but let me explain how this has to do with ethics and
yeah, but
morality.
how do you as an evolution you preach? So as evolution,
Anyone can preach.
someone else
Preaching
is
is
saying,
not
speak for
exclusive
yourself.
to
I'm
religion.
going to break
Anyone
all
can
the
preach
rules.
anything. I can
You're,
preach why sacking my bishop is okay. It
well,
doesn't matter.
I'm
You
not
don't
saying
get
like
a
your civil
right
rights
to
or
preach
your free
because you
speech.
have some
I'm saying
religious
from
indoctrination. You don't
your
get that
worldview,
card.
and your beliefs are not actually arising from your evolutionary worldview.
No, I'm trying to give you an
From
example of ethics and
evolutionary, I'm not
morality
talking
here.
about what you believe. I'm talking from evolutionary worldview that you're deriving these things
No, from an
from
actual scientific fact, from
philosophical
historical.
religious principles. You're
No,
not deriving
I'm
it
trying to give an
from your
example of
evolutionary
how the
worldview.
first he. Oh,
How is this deriving from your evolutionary worldview?
because it has to do with your. It's in response to your ethics and morality.
I mean,
But you
but
won't
you're
let me
using these
say it.
terms like we in society.
But you won't let me say
If
it.
someone's saying like I'm going
How
to
do
get
you know
ahead,
what I'm gonna say? You don't let me say it.
oh, go ahead.
Okay, so ethics and morality, our first great example of humanity, as you want to say it, comes from a healed femur. Way before any religious activity, this is a sign that humans cooperatively worked together. They were emotionally triggered and invested, even though it was no benefit. I mean, there's no like obvious instant benefit. In that time period, a femur, a broken leg would be instant death. Instant death without help, right? You needed help to food, defend yourself from predators. No, a community gathered around this person and they protected and fed that person until they healed, and then they lived their life long enough to have a completely healed femur. That is an innate desire to help other people, and that desire has been passed along and created life and reproduction into and why we survived as a species. This innate desire. And that same innate desire is why we don't want to kill people innately. We don't want to harm people. Right? There's of course exceptions where in defense or somebody does something absolutely atrocious or whatever, and or other urges overcoming that desire, that innate desire to hurt, not hurt, and cooperate. Those are overcome by sexual urges, food, threatening, like psychosis, all sorts of things can interfere with that. But that innate desire is in all of us. And in so many
I don't
species,
see how what you're
it's very
saying is empirical or
demonstratable.
scientific. Like we do not like speak for yourself. There's plenty of people who do. So like, what's this? We do not want, and then say that even if you have
As
explanation for how that became the dominant strain of humans that believe in these morals or
the
ethics.
majority of people don't want to murder people. That's
That's
what I mean by
speculation. No, I
we,
mean,
as
I'm
in the
saying there's even
majority.
evidentiary. I mean, certainly among males, that even to say, okay, 1 out of 30 males will kill someone in their lifetime,
The
but if
majority
you
of
want
people
to put
don't kill
all
exactly the
people,
one. That's why.
even
Because it's
females,
1
but
out
you
of
say,
33.
well, have you never
Instead
wanted
of
to kill
33
someone?
out of 1.
No,
That's
you don't
why
have to
it's an
answer, but
innate.
just hypothetically, you've never wanted to kill somebody.
Of course I've wanted
I don't see whether
God's
you've killed
gonna
somebody.
mind.
But you
But
ever,
it's not about wanting or doing. They're completely different.
well, you just contradicted yourself. You said we don't want to kill people, then you said, but you actually you have wanted to kill people before.
I haven't wanted to. The idea has crossed my mind, but I've never ever wanted to kill anyone. Not in an actual sense.
But I'm saying the idea that they're saying it's a natural response, like you have to be taught and learned and civilized that naturally children when they get angry they hit each other, and they have to be
Mm-hmm.
taught and socialized to not behave that way, and even anger
And they don't
to
murder each other though.
the point. Well, by saying we do murder each other, that murder is extremely common. Like
Out of norm. No, it's not
one
common.
out of 30
It's
people
completely out of
kill
norm.
somebody in their lifetime. It's not like an abstract phenomenon that never occurs. Like
Those
murder.
numbers do not encompass just murderous urges. A lot of those are in response to other stimulation, other urges, other so many variables. It's not that number is ridiculous.
But I mean,
So many variables.
your speculation that humans don't want to kill is just speculation. And you're saying you argue, well, humans do want to kill. Humans do in fact kill.
It can be falsified and it can be tested though, Sora.
Well, I mean, you're just saying like, well, I mean, just for the level, like, I mean, God forbid, like I'm in Metro Detroit, there's 400 murders a year, 300 of them go unsolved.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, God forbid, there's the majority of murderers in my area, in fact, get away with it, at least from a legal perspective. And, saying people didn't want to kill, like tell that to the 400 people in Detroit who were killed last year.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean,
but that's still a tragic as that is, and horrible as those numbers are. That's still not the
well, why is it even tragic?
Majority. Murder is tragic. What do you mean?
Well,
How is that tragic?
Well, from an evolutionary point of view, why is that not just the weak dying off? Like, why is it tragic? I mean, from a spiritual, religious point of view, I could explain why it's tragic. From an evolutionary point of view,
because it's not the fitness. It's not okay. It's not about weak or strength, weakness or
but
strength.
You can't prescribe what is fitness. You can't prescribe what is fitness if it's fit. Fitness is determined by natural process, not by moralistic prescription. I mean, you're saying maybe it's fit. If it's fit, it'll survive. If it's not fit, it won't. You can't prescribe what's going to be fit or not.
No, things can die and survive or whatever. I'm seeing traits that are more likely to increase the species survival are more likely to be passed on, and then therefore more likely to increase the population. That traits will become more popular. That's it. That's all. You're taking it and spewing it into something that's not.
Well, because I'm trying to pin you down to
go ahead,
derive your moralistic ethical system from your evolutionary psychology. So what at least the audience to understand that your moral ethical system does not actually derive from evolution. It derives from more a religious philosophical system.
No, it doesn't.
And your moral ethical belief actually contradicts evolution, because evolution more points towards nihilism, towards morals and ethics being a preference that
I knew it was bad to hurt somebody before I knew what evolution or any religion was. Before I knew what God was, I knew it was bad to hurt somebody.
It doesn't Are you sure about that?
Yes, it doesn't take any religious ideology to know that.
No, I mean, evidentially, say, I mean, even like Piaget's theory of child development. When you were like a young kid, and you got upset at another person, did you hit them and then had to get punished? And it's like, no, as naturally when you were a young girl and someone mistreated you,
No, I very
you
distinctly
use
remember hitting
violence.
someone and then seeing them cry and feeling immensely bad.
What's your earliest memory? I mean, what age do you have that memory of?
I
Like
don't
5 or 6
remember.
years old?
It was early. I don't remember. But I was never indoctrinated into
But I
any
mean, it's
religious
unlikely that you have a
ideology.
memory. But I'm saying that no, I'm saying that I mean, you were just talking about child development and like Piaget's theory or any
Right.
theory of child development, and even likelihood that your earliest childhood memory is probably 5 or 6 years old. It's very possible at like 3 or 4 years old you went around hitting people, and your mother disciplined you or your parents disciplined you, and but it was your natural inclination as a young child without your parents' indoctrination to hurt people, and that your first memory, so
Hmm. Yeah, you can't
you blacked
differentiate if
out the
that's
memory
not.
of your parents disciplining you, and you
Yeah,
have your
there's no
first
way to
memory at
know.
like 5 or 6 years old of
Hmm.
feeling empathy, when the evidence of child development is that empathy doesn't arise till later, even like 5 or 6, maybe even 7 or 8
There's no
years
way to
old.
know from that example, but we can look at primates
From
that
your
have
mother,
lived completely
your mother, you
isolated.
raised your kids,
We can
and
we can leave we can view
When your
completely.
mother, you raised your kids, you're saying that your kids naturally had empathy, or empathy is something that came through stages of development with cognitive development, more
Yes, children
likely like.
naturally have empathy. Children will naturally see somebody struggling and want to help them, not because they were told to.
I don't
I've
think that's the
witnessed
case. I
this
mean,
I've witnessed this in lots of
children
things.
naturally steal. So like you have to, when you have a baby and your baby wants something, they take it, and then you have to teach them like, no, this is
Stealing isn't
mommy.
as directly
This is
harmful
mommy. Like
as
this is
physically hitting
my.
somebody.
So when your kid is like 2 or 3 years old, and they just you have to, they will naturally take anything. They don't understand that it's not theirs, and then
Hmm.
you have to indoctrinate them like, no, this is mommy's,
No, you
not
have to wait
yours.
for brain development. You don't have to indoctrinate them. You have
No,
to
it's
wait for
not
brain
natural. It's part
development.
of indoctrinating. I'm saying
No, it's part of brain
you're claiming
development.
that you didn't teach your kid at some point that like, this is mommy's, not yours, and you didn't have to indoctrinate your kid into understanding what like your property versus their property was, and that they're not allowed to just take your stuff.
Why don't you
I
think
mean, I'm
that?
almost certain you did. This is well established, like psychological child development, that
But what makes
that
you think that's not an
children like babies
innate
naturally just take what
behavioral
they want.
evolved trait? What makes you think that's not another innate behavioral trait that's
Well,
evolved
you want to say
to our
everything's innate, but
benefit,
I think it
to
has
be
to
able
be.
to pass information and into our young to help our young? Of course, we as a species we do that. Almost all species do that. We teach our young to survive.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could have it. I mean, most child development theories are evolutionary, and would say it's determined by genetics. But it's like even the evolutionists, the child development theorists, generally hold that there's a phases of child development, and that something like understanding property is something that has to be taught, and that someone who's not taught will not develop these things. So if you were raised into the
It's
wild,
not. We've done experiments.
you would not
No.
derive the understanding of private property.
We've done experiments on primates that have been taught nothing of property, and they demonstrate a clear understanding of what belongs to someone and what belongs to someone else. We've witnessed this behavior without being taught.
I'm pretty sure that's. I mean, even you're talking like a dog or something. Like you could train a dog, you could train a primate.
No, without
But if you
training.
take an
Without
untrained
training.
dog into
Like
your
we
house,
can.
they're just going to touch
You don't need
everything,
to
attack
train
your
it.
food. You have
No,
to train them. If you take a
no.
primate into your
There's
house, they're not
even
going to.
crows
They're
demonstrate this
just going to start touching
understanding.
things.
Even crows.
Well, through
Crows demonstrate this ability, this understanding of possession.
through reinforcement and positive reinforcement mechanisms like Pavlovian training, where they try to take things that they can't, and they get punished for it, just like how we train a dog or how you trained your kid.
Okay, so that's now exactly religion doesn't
I
isn't
mean,
needed
we
for
got
that.
down this rabbit
Religion
hole
is
because
not
you were
needed for
claiming
this
that
at
there's
all,
some sort of
though.
like
We,
naturalistic human thing that you're like you shouldn't do these things. But I'm pretty sure that's inaccurate in terms of like child development. The children naturally do these things and have to be trained not to do them.
no, they have a lot of innate. desires that
condition.
are witnessable in primates without conditioning that are there with in regards of punishment, remorse, not wanting to harm people and wanting to help people. It's witnessable in many species without training.
At a certain level, but I mean, largely these things are conditioned.
Religion didn't. I mean, those crows weren't going to church on Sundays, if you know what I mean. Like it's not, religion is absolutely not necessary for ethical or moral compassing.
When we're talking about stealing, like conditioned through, like,
But stealing, we could come up with some million circumstances when stealing could be ethically okay. Are you starving to death? Is your pregnant wife starving to death? And the only way you could save your pregnant child, your wife and child, is by stealing a loaf of bread? Maybe it's okay then, because I mean, we're going to go into moral or ethics. Are we going to outweigh, like, what is that stolen loaf of bread going to cost the baker versus what is me not stealing that bread going to cost my wife, my child, and myself? Right? We can weigh these, and we can come up with contexts and situations where we can justify all sorts of shit. Murder.
well,
Even.
it also gets back to the hard problem consciousness, because you're presupposing some sort of cognitive theory that of what goes on. So, like, conditioning certainly happens in the sense, like, okay, like a bird, or even a reptile, even an insect, that could say, well, there's something that they want, but they could be conditioned to, it will lead to their death. And like even an
But that's
insect,
evolutionary
about death,
survival, though.
even an
That's
insect
something
may
else.
not fall for a trap of that's conditioned to some sort of life preservation. And so it's not that they've cognitively learned that stealing is wrong, but it's been conditioned, and it's like that's dependent. It's unclear from an evolutionary point of view whether people are just conditioned into morality. And so, say the people that do perform morally behavior, like don't kill, rape, or steal, is not because they have some sort of moral center or belief in cooperation. It's through conditioning. And
And
the
I'm sure
people
I
who do
agree
perform those behavior
to an extent.
just escaped conditioning somehow. And then the question, you're saying that what is the natural conclusion of an evolutionary worldview regarding moral and ethical behavior? And say, like, okay, well, it's a kill be world, God forbid.
Mhm.
That so the conclusion, it's a kill be world. Maybe you could derive that from evolution, and saying, so I mean, you're not looking like cognitively, like, oh, because I believe in evolution I act this way, but
No,
you're
no,
talking
no,
what
no. I'm only
natural
talking about
conclusion
innate
of the theory itself
default
is.
traits. Yeah, no, I'm not talking about uh, my acceptance of evolution influencing my ideology on ethics or morality
We didn't
at
even talk
all.
about
I'm
the hard
talking
problem
about
of consciousness, to say that even if you have some form of cognitive explanation for the I, that that say, like, that there's an
that's so
I.
funny how that's such a common argument. Evolution, the I, just the I. Wow, because it's too complex to explain. Currently, it must be like
Well, no, I'm saying that
explain the argument for this, the I thing, because I've seen this so many times, and it's
well, I'm saying that
hilarious.
when you're talking cognitively about an I who makes decisions,
No, wait, no, an
you're
I that
you're
makes decisions. What do you mean? Are you talking about consciousness now, or a soul?
yeah, where you say, like, okay, like,
Not like a physical
God
eyeball.
forbid, should I rape, murder, or steal? And you're saying that there's an I who cognitively makes that
Oh,
decision.
oh, you're talking. Wait,
In any form of, like, morals and ethics, to say that like this hard problem of consciousness, who is this I? Where does this I derive? So, as a spiritualist, I think
are
this
you
I,
you're saying I as in a consciousness, or just what decides what you decide?
yeah.
Okay.
And so, from an evolutionary materialist perspective, uh, I mean, from I read the literature, most of the evolutionists reject that there is a unified I, that the unified I is actually a spiritual idea. And so evolutionists would say that there is no unified I. There,
I agree with that.
you could have the compartmentalized mind. You could have, like, I've, Grossberg's book and Resonant Brain, or, I shared in the slides, active inference and the free energy principle. But it's a misnomer that derives from spiritual language, that there's a unified I. And even to
Yeah,
say
it's
that
a
I
religious
decided to behave ethically or morally, that from evolutionary perspective, that's not actually what happened. That's
people
just the
don't need an
words we use
eye
to
to
describe it.
behave well.
And so if you're talking like series of conditioning, um, or like consciousness, the I that experiences, even like the eliminativist um, view of consciousness, that consciousness doesn't actually exist, or even like decision making, even questions of free will, to say free will is a religious concept, and many evolutionists you reject the classical religious free will and say it doesn't actually work like that. The even these cognitive processes to say, well, like the we cooperate not because like some mental function that I thought about it and cooperated. You're saying was genetically determined uh, by natural selection features that cooperation was more productive in your ancestors.
Uh-huh.
Therefore, you have a tendency to cooperate.
Yeah.
However, God forbid the children of rapists may have a different genetic makeup
Well,
that
and not just genetic makeup, but variations. I mean, mutations. There's always, and there's environmental influences that change. It's not just genetics. There's a lot of environmental variables that can change a person's mental stature and whether they're likely to murder or guided by
there's
a
not a
moral
process of self,
compass.
but what that it's not. It's there's no evolutionary understanding that it's a process of self reflection. To say like, well, I philosophized and thought about it and decided upon this course of action
No,
that
it's
there's
premeditative.
no
It's
biological
I don't want to kill him.
evolutionary.
That would feel bad. It's that simple. That would feel bad. I don't want to kill this person.
Well,
There's
even
there's
that
there's the desire.
there's no clear like who is this I that doesn't want to kill? Who is this I that feels bad?
Because it's not an
And,
it's
and
not an
even that
I. It's
speculation to
it's
say like no, maybe there isn't. Maybe, what's to say that
what
maybe you would
creates
feel
these
bad,
innate
but what's to
desires.
say
Why do
that
turtles automatically go towards the water when they're plopped down randomly and they can't see? There's a lot of innate knowledge that we don't fully understand, but it's there.
well, I'm gonna say if it's conditioned, because
That's not conditions.
you
Brand new
weren't
turtles
conditioned
will
in violence,
find
so you have
the
an aversion
water.
to it.
They'll start
But
moving in the direction of the water
someone else
without
was conditioned
any
in
sense.
violence and has a proclivity towards it, and there's just a question which one's more adaptive. And to say, okay, like maybe you found a pacifist person to mate with, and raise pacifist children, and an aggressive person, God forbid, maybe they're a rapist, and the woman will raise the children of the rapist, or they'll find another aggressive woman that wants to raise aggressive children, and they'll condition their children to be aggressive, and it's just a question of which one's more adaptive,
Mhm.
and whether there's going to be a selection pressure. So if there's
Yeah,
less
no,
selection pressure,
it's exactly
right
those
now
aggressive children
you
versus
have
those
both in the
nice children.
population. You have aggressive and passive people in the
Who's more likely to
population.
get help
What I'm
out of
saying,
those
but should
groups?
there be selection pressure, which one's more likely to survive?
The
And so,
non-aggressive, the helpful, the cooperative
well,
one,
no,
because
you
they're more
can't.
likely to have help.
Yeah, but that's just predictive. You can't. Evolutionary is determined.
Well, doesn't that make sense though? In a fundamental basics, um, there's two groups. One's cooperative, one's aggressive
No,
and
I
mean.
mean you're
One's
talking like
helpful.
in Lamarckian.
What's going to be more
Evolution is
successful
not
in a group
purpose
of
driven.
other people? What's going to get the
Evolution
most help? What's going to have the leg up? What's going to be
evolution is
more
not
likely to produce?
direction oriented. That is just a process, and we don't know which one's going to be more adaptive. Whichever one's more adaptive will be the one that
But we
you
can
win.
look at past cycles and predict. We have very similar. That's why I'm so sad that you discredit all of this past information
I
from
didn't discredit it.
creating
I mean, when I was
current.
talking about it, I was talking about the hard science of the scientific theory of evolution versus historically perspective. I mean, even from the evolutionary understanding, you have periods of resource competition and selection pressure. So when we're at peacetime and there's lack of selection pressure in abundant resources, it could be the pacifist would win out. But in a time of resource shortage and selection pressure, like war, then the pacifist would lose out and the aggressive behavior would win out. And so it's environmentally selected for, so that currently, while society's stable, that maybe the pacifists win out over so the sociopaths or psychopaths. But should we uh, approach a wartime situation or resource shortage, that it would actually be the psychopaths that would win out.
Yeah, but the reason that psychopaths haven't won out and why there are much less frequent than normal psychiatric profiles is because of that. Because it makes you less likely to survive. People that
Well,
are
it's because of the
psychopaths are less
randomness.
likely. No, people that are psychopaths are less likely to reproduce.
Because
Plain simple, and that's why they have less numbers in the population. It's just that simple. We can go into it
yeah, but
further,
that's
but
because the randomness
that's
of
what
the
it
current
reduces to.
environment we live in.
No,
But
it's not just that. There's variables,
should
as
the
in I'm
environment change,
I'm not going to
that
want to have a
psychopaths
baby
could
with
be
a
more
psychopath.
adaptive.
No, if somebody's presenting as neurologically atypical to me in a harmful or scary manner, I'm not going to reproduce with them, right? Of course, there's exceptions where they can rape or maybe they hook up before their partner can be concerned by that, but that reduces a lot of reproduction rate. And that's why that trait isn't as prominent. And that's why that is
That's
not.
environmentally determined. And it's
Exactly.
saying
Everything is
that,
environmentally determined. All
yeah,
of
but it's saying
evolution,
that's only because
is environmentally determined.
yeah.
Absolutely
So
all of it.
you're just not admitting the obvious that that there would be certain environments where it'd be more adaptive to be psychopathic. That's why psychopaths still exist in the
I can't imagine
population.
one. I don't know of one, is why.
Well, I
So
mean,
explain one to me.
resource shortage,
In the
uh,
Hunger Games.
stability, times of high instability and resource shortage.
Hmm. And that's perhaps why we have a high population of psychopaths that we do. That could be why there are still around. It's because of resource shortages situations, but because of our cooperative nature, we can avoid resource shortages, and that outweighs the people that try and take advantage of that and hurt other people to their own gain.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just sounds like you're trying to rationalize within the evolutionary framework. Um,
Well, aren't you doing the same with your ideological framework?
well, no, because I'm
It's the
operating
exact
with
same thing we're doing.
I'm operating within um, the postulates and given of my worldview.
And
So
I am
from
too.
the but no, because from evolutionary worldview, there's no direction towards of humanity or biological direction, that it's driven by
Yeah.
naturalistic processes of natural selection and mutation, and there's no reason within your worldview that I mean, you could give within the evolutionary framework, but to say that like psychopaths shouldn't win out over cooperators, that evolution is not deterministic like that. And you say, as an evolutionist, you would say, well, it could be that psychopaths will genetically win out. It's a possibility.
Hmm. I
You
mean,
would at least
I don't know.
acknowledge that
The thing is,
evolutionary. There's no like
there
direction of
there is with
evolution
current.
that it's sure that psychopaths are going to lose out to cooperators.
Well, no, exactly. Well, in this current environment, that's the case. That's the case. In our current environment, psychopaths are set up to lose, right? But I don't know what our environment will be in the future. Maybe in the future we have environmental factors that makes that an advantage trait. Yeah, yeah. I don't know.
It's my essential point
Currently, it's not an advantage though, so that's why there aren't more psychopaths than not. Simple as that.
yeah. So that's the point, that it's not because it's moral or ethical
It's
in the
because it's not
evolution.
advantage. There's no advantage to it. If there was, there would be more.
And
That's
even to say that you can't necessarily even derive from evolutionary framework that there is such a thing, a moral or ethical. You're saying, oh, will people operate cooperatively because currently it's more advantageous to operate cooperatively?
hmm.
But so either the people who are pre-genetically disposed to operate cooperatively, should the factors change, will die off, or will have to adapt to operating non-cooperatively in order to survive, but not because operating cooperatively is naturally moral or ethical.
So here's the great. I love this. Pennsylvania State University is where do ethics come from? In terms of where ethics come from, they come from the society and the collective beliefs and values of its citizens. But more specifically, ethics also come from those individuals willing to make difficult choices and think about big questions, good and bad, right and wrong. Nothing to do with religion. It's a societal collective, like we. I'm gonna say we collectively decide our ethics and our morals, right?
Well, it's a misnomer because you're not speaking in evolutionary terms when you say the we,
How? How is that?
because there is no we.
Okay.
I mean, it's not scientific terminology. I mean, you're just using speech and natural, but saying like in terms of evolutionary theory, there is no we.
Well,
I mean, you even said
there
like
are.
speciation. You're saying like no. I mean, like you just said that like people like new species form, and this we is adaptable and malleable and changeable, and subject to the process of natural selection at all time. So I mean, you're saying that this we is you really a theological term, not an evolutionary term.
No, you're bending it that way, but no, it's absolutely not intended that way.
Okay, I mean we're kind of going in circles, so maybe we
Mhm.
could move into final conclusion, and unless there's anything else you wanted to discuss.
Hold on, let me check my notes. I think we covered about everything. The evolution of
it's a huge
morality
topic. I say you
is,
could
yeah, it's a big one.
people I said like evolution is definitely in like the top 5 recurring major subjects for debate, and there's hundreds of varying points that could be debated, and even any of these issues. Like we only covered a fraction of it, and most of these are current grounds of research.
Yeah. Okay, here's one. You're not your body, right? You've separated consciousness as you define as a soul is separate and as who you are, and your body is just separate. How do you know this? That you're not your body?
Um, well, through introspection, I could give
Okay, introspection. I mean, I can introspect that I'm a space moon goddess. Doesn't mean it's right.
no, but I'm saying the I. That I mean, the
Hmm.
introspection is the question: who is the I?
Yeah.
And you're saying, okay, there's an I that like there is a body that clearly whoever this I is the one controlling this body, is the one that feels pain and pleasure related to the
How
body.
do you know that though? And it's not just a biological outcome of your body.
Well, so I would posture that science only could test material phenomenon. So,
How do you test non-material phenomenon?
well, through the mind. I would say that the mind is not material, so that my mind,
Your mind
um,
can test and validate this theory solely,
well, you could use
and
the
that's enough
power.
to
You could
validate
use the power of logic and introspection, and the tools of logic like deduction.
explain the power of introspection and how it helps you define yourself as a soul and not a body or a reaction of a biological.
Well, just like we were talking about moral and ethical behavior, that I could intellectually reflect, read books, or study, meditate, and make a determination of the proper way to accord my behavior.
How do you
And
define
then,
the proper way to accord your behavior, though? What
because
constitutes
I
that?
determined that through introspection.
Right.
And so that's with the determination that the I,
But introspection comes from what? Just past perspectives and your own singular perspective of experiences that you've gained in your own singular life, correct?
so my body is just sitting here. And so it's
Hmm.
saying the I, like the I that is thinking right now
Your
and
brain, your
introspecting of
consciousness.
the best way to accord my body.
Yeah. And why wouldn't your brain just naturally do that as a living organism to better your survival? Why wouldn't, as an organism, why wouldn't you just have the
Well, that's just
ability to do
hypothesis.
that? Otherwise, you would die. You would have to have that introspective ability.
No, I mean, that's just hypothesis. There's no,
Okay, but why do you so firmly believe it? That you're not your body,
because I've
you're
been
a
praying and
soul.
meditating and introspecting,
How does
and
praying
and
help it?
generally, like I believe in the concept of character refinement.
But why do you believe in it?
Well, because it derived from religious principles.
But why do you think that?
Why do I think that?
Yeah, why do you think that this that you've derived from religious
Because
principles? How did you
I
get
have
that from religion?
I
Where do you
mean
think that came from?
Well, because I went to seminary and studied and meditated
We're
and,
not
and
talking about
focused on
education
religious texts, but
credentials
I
here.
went through.
We're talking about why you believe something.
Well, it's the question of who the I is. So that to me, it makes more sense that the I who introspects is not this body. This body is not introspecting. The
Because
I
you
that is separate from my body is introspecting. The body doesn't introspect.
why couldn't it be
The
part
I
of it?
introspects. The
Why
mind
isn't your
introspects.
eye part of your body?
It's just like a
Because
computer.
when you die,
It's
you
just
want
like
to
a
be able to
computer program. A
separate your
computer
dead
program.
body from yourself, so you're not afraid of death.
Well, I mean, it'd be part of it to say, okay, the I.
Because then you don't die, right? You never die then if you have an eye.
Well, yeah, I'm saying the I is immaterial and not
Exactly.
really
So
will
you're
will
immortal with
survive
this
death.
eye theory. You're completely immortal. Of course, anyone would want to grab
Well,
onto
not
that.
necessarily immortal. I mean, it's just saying that the I is not my body. Whether the I that's not my body is
But immortal time,
eternal.
you don't have to be afraid of death, right? Because you're gonna have this eye that carries on beyond your body dying,
No, it would be fear of
right?
death, standing judgment. Maybe I fear death. I fear judgment, and that
Well, I wouldn't fear death either if I
I
knew
could
I
be
was gonna
fear I
go
could
on
fear death
forever.
because I'd be fear death because I go to hell, or I could be reincarnated into a lower life form.
Yeah.
So I mean, my fear, my action, and I'm just talking about the character refinement, self improvement process, and just because personally, like I went to, my body, I went to Israel, after 18, and I studied in seminary and did a bunch of meditation and prayer, and I came across, the concept of character refinement and meditation and prayer, and I
I
changed.
can come up
At
with
least from my
some
perspective, I
information.
changed into becoming a better person,
That's
and I
great.
did that through introspection about what is the proper way to act, and then how to accord myself in the proper behavior in accordance of, so just to say, is there a proper way to behave, and then how do I align myself with the proper way to behave, and then I changed myself from the way I used to act to uh so-called the proper way to behave. And so I would say the interest, but the I that did that, um so I don't feel that it was my body. I feel that it was a non-material aspect that controls my body, and that's how I was able to do it.
Okay.
That as someone who went through the process of a self-improvement
Yeah.
process, that to me it happened in this dualistic system where it was a non-material body I that was perfecting the bodily I
Okay.
into
And I
maybe
respect that.
maybe a unified I. So I was saying it's not something that could be scientifically tested in that way, because
Sure.
scientific test is
It's not
only
very measurable.
material. You can't see into my mind.
Yeah.
I can't see into your mind. There's no scientific way to see into a person's mind. So it's just that as a person who reflects on my own mind, I have determined that I don't think my mind, uh, I think that the mind, my I, is separate from my body.
Okay. And I absolutely respect that, especially the self introspection to improve and however you worded that. But you don't need religion to do that.
That's
You
what's
don't.
picking on your we. That we're saying when you're using the we, in my perception, that we that you're using is the non-material we, like the I that chooses to behave properly. That's
I
the
say
I.
we
That's
as
not
a
the body.
species of
If you're
human.
talking, yeah, but saying that you're talking like we, the universal soul of the species. But if from an evolutionary point of view, there is no, I mean, I say there is no we, but it makes more sense that
There
that
is a
we
we.
you're
You and
referring
I are
to
humans.
is
We
a
are humans.
non-material we, not a material we. And you're saying, well, how do you even define that? I could easily define that non-material we. Saying that the universal human soul, the world soul. However, within an evolutionary framework, it's much more difficult for you to define that collective we.
I wrote an article on introspection. I won't. That doesn't help in a debate to to use your stuff. Um, but no, absolutely, you don't need introspection. Is absolutely beautiful and great, and more people need to sit down and really think and consolidate ideas
Even
and
this conversation
grow.
right now, so say like we're talking about theoretical, um, meta topics, like we're in the world of ideas. So obviously, okay, like there's my body sitting here and there's your body sitting here, and the speech faculty to produce speech. But the I that is thinking about these concepts and discussing with you, that's my mind. And the you that is thinking about these concepts and discussing with me, that's your mind.
Mhm.
And in essence, it has no connection to either one of our bodies. The fact that we're talking about these theoretical subjects, and
I
thinking about
I think
them,
it's a result
it's
of my
completely
body.
disconnected from. Well, I mean, the speech pattern that the speech mechanism and the air and the formation, the words are coming out, but they're saying that your mind that is contemplating and thinking about these things is not dependent upon your body.
I think it absolutely is. That's where I disagree. I think it's a result of a biological process. Your consciousness. I don't say the I or mind or soul. It's consciousness. Your awareness, your alertness, your ability to retain information, make decisions, and change the course of your life, which is evolutionary essential to survival. Right? We
Even just
have
to
a bad
contemplate
situation, we
theoretical.
can choose to avoid it. We're in a dangerous situation, we can choose to avoid it, and that's how we've passed on these self-aware traits
Yeah,
in
I mean, even
our
besides like the
survival.
I, the controller, the I, the thinker, the I that contemplates
See,
theoretical
the
subjects.
I is such a religious, metaphysical term that I don't dabble with that. It's not a measurable, real thing.
Yeah,
Consciousness
that's why I said from
is.
the evolutionary perspective, I is just a figure of speech, and saying whether evolutionary the I even exists is controversial.
It's
A
the
lot
I
of
isn't an
evolutionists say that
evolutionary
there really
term.
is
It's
no
a
I.
religious term.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying you're using religious terminology, although you claim
I'm
to
using
describe
I
the evolutionary worldview.
to play with you, this I idea. But no, when I say this I, it's consciousness. It's not a religious idea. I'm not throwing any religious ideology. Please tell
Well,
me what religious ideology I'm using here.
well, it's saying it's supporting my worldview that you, despite being a proposed evolutionist, in order to communicate, have to use religious terminology.
The fact that your mom needs antibiotics regularly is supporting mine.
Potentially. I'm going to argue with that, but it's saying that that doesn't change the fact that in order to express your ideas, you have to use religious terminology, is somewhat of evidence against evolution.
Well, how linguistics morph, I mean, if we discluded any religious terminology from current usage, I mean, we would have a very limited vocabulary. That doesn't, I mean, terminology,
Which is like
linguistics, it
evidentiary.
evolves from story, from fiction, from nonfiction, from religion. It's all evolved to say that, oh, you took this from Shakespeare, you don't have a right to use this, or
I didn't say you didn't have a right. It's
no,
evidentiary. It's
right,
evidentiary
okay,
against evolution and in favor
it's
of
not.
dualism and a
It
spiritual
might be a
system. That
term
even
that
you, as an evolutionist, have to use spiritual language. So if you're evolutionist, why are
spiritual
you why are
language.
you using
Why
spiritual
why
language?
is it spiritual language? Like why do they have the ownership of that spirituality? Why is religion anything I just said?
Because
How
it
is it
derives from a dualistic system. That to say
why
it's
did
not
but that's my
evolutionary
point.
in
Why does
basis, the nature of there being a
using language that derives from anything? That's my point. Why are you discrediting it
no, I mean,
because of where I'm from?
the
Well, I
concept
can
is
I
the
can use
concept is
language that's
derivative
derived
of a
from the flying
dualistic.
spaghetti monster, but it's still a
No, and the
language and it's
concept
still
is the expressions you're using are derivative from a dualistic worldview and not of the evolutionary worldview. And the fact that you're discussing these things in dualistic spiritual terms as opposed to evolutionary
it's not
terms,
spiritualistic terms. I mean, the I I'm referring to as consciousness. That's what
I
I.
mean, so that you yourself don't even believe in evolution because you're speaking about these things in non-evolutionary terms, but in
How?
dualistic
What
spiritual terms.
things? Give me an exact sentence of what I used that was in a spiritualistic term and not evolutionary.
Well, I and we.
I and we. Those are inherently religious words. No,
I would
come
say I would say
on.
they're
Origins
merely
of a word or
they're
linguistic. I'm a
dualistic.
word.
They're
Okay,
dualistic.
do
They're
you want to
dualistic
tie in
spiritual
words to
concepts.
this? Okay, this is all right.
They're dualistic
No,
spiritual concepts.
this is so silly. We're getting completely off the
No,
track
it's not
here.
silly
It
because
is
when
very
you
silly.
use the term
You're going
I, you're referring to the classical
you're turning this
philosophical
into a
conception of a
linguistics
dualistic system,
argument, and it
not
makes
to the
it feel like you're
evolutionary.
really just like trying to grab on to any point, like you're falling and just grabbing onto threads. If you're pulling linguistic arguments out, because I'm using I and we, and you're classifying that as a spiritual usage of the word.
No, I
No,
mean,
those are straws,
I'm
my
saying as someone who
friends.
constantly studies scientific models of the mind, evolutionary models of the mind, you are not speaking in terms of
What evolutionary models of the mind? Show me, please.
the current evolutionary models of the mind. That's why I specialize in. That's what I
Show
study.
me. Show me this
Like the
current evolutionary
Penrose-Hammond
model of the mind.
hypothesis,
Show
Stephen
me.
Grossberg's, the resonant mind, um, uh, Carl Friston's active inference free energy
Models is a
principle,
scientific term. You can't.
Jerry Fodor's the compartmental mind. Um, I mean, just the top theoretical models of physical models of the brain have a different postulation about how consciousness and people work than the spiritualistic model. So when you're speaking about things, you're not speaking about them in terms of the current top biological evolutionary models of mind. You're speaking about
No, I
them in
am.
terms
Absolutely.
of the spiritual models of the
No,
mind.
because you interpret it that way doesn't mean that's what I'm speaking of. I'm sorry you misinterpreted that. But absolutely no, that is in 100% in vein and in line with evolutionary, how do you call it? Thinking? Framework? However you want to frame it. You don't get to use we and us. We and us is not a spiritual term, okay? It's a communication linguistic term that can be used in any context. Yeah, we're not making any more progress. We should cut it.
Okay, so you want to say final words? You want me to go first? Or you want to say something?
Okay, I'll say final. I don't have anything prepared, but I'm just the reason I got on here because I I've just seen evolution just slapped in the face on whatever modern day debate or whatever the other review, and it's insulting. I'm honestly insulted by it because you're probably alive. Your mom's probably alive. I know I'm alive because of the study of evolution. I'm literally alive because of it. I would be dead without it. Um, we were able to perform surgery to treat antibiotic resistant infection. We're able to create life-saving crops. We're able to prevent millions, billions of people from starving or dying of malnutrition because of evolution, because of the study of evolution. The evidence of overwhelming and modern medicine completely relies on that. And without it, I would be dead, and probably most of us, unfortunately. So thank you, evolution, and the scientists that have risked their life to share their work because, like you, and especially earlier on, this was a death sentence to come across and like be like, hey, I found this information. Oh wait, it doesn't really fit with the Bible idea. Shit. You know what? Lots of people died because of that. It's not a joke. Lots of people risked their lives to share this information, to share true, honest findings that they found and dedicated their life and their learnings and pass this along. And thank you to those people. That's all I want to say. I'm alive. But and thank you, Doovid. I really appreciate this, and I'm glad to have this discussion with you because you are Doovid's a very good friend of mine, and we disagree on many, many things, but that does not change that I consider him. Sorry, my job. Dream. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I
Sorry,
appreciate.
but I appreciate you, and I'm really glad that we're able to discuss this, and it doesn't change how I feel about you. I respect you, and I'm glad we're friends. That's all.
Oh well, thanks for that. And I say friendship is not necessarily at all determined upon agreeing with each other on philosophical or even religious, social, cultural issues. It's more on accepting people as they are or being being there for them in their time of need, which is largely completely independent. And in terms like if I want, I don't, I could you could find groups of common interest that or people that agree with you doesn't make them your friends. But you definitely appreciate Joanne coming on. Good conversation. To me, I largely think any world ignorance is the natural condition, so it never surprises me that people don't know what they're talking about or don't understand these things because you have to work hard, you have to study, you have to invest a lot of time and effort in order to understand these things. And if a person has not done that, uh, it's almost guaranteed they're not going to understand it. So the conversations and the best way to improve your understanding is sometimes to argue it out, like a Talmudic method with someone who disagrees with you. So for personally, I'm not like we stressed at length. There's like the broad versus narrow definitions of evolution,
Simple
and
versus complex.
yeah, and to some extent, I'm not like anti-evolution in the narrow aspects and some of the medical or theoretical biological understandings. Um, I'm not even like conclusive that say the cosmology of evolution to say like definitively it's false, but to say that certainly the broad definition of evolution um, has significant amount of problems, and even the narrow definitions, there's still an explanatory gap. There's still a lot of uncertainty. Still a lot of research uh, to do, and in terms of someone, I want to know the truth. I want to know how to be a better person. I want to live in reality. So I'm constantly studying, and evolution is the main theory. I went to university. I was almost pre-med. I'm constantly trying to know the best of my reality. But from my spiritual perspective, I think that evolution is problematic. It relates to maybe atheism and people not taking a spiritual approach in life, because the biggest point that thank God we got to it, was this point that I am not my body. And there's a different approach to how you interact with the world, and spirituality, prayer, karma, action, reaction, morals, ethics. When you look at things that like I have a soul and that's different from my body. And I think that the biggest reason why people today reject that is because evolution, and they think that that they are the body, and that science and everything could naturally explain that. So that's why I make such a hard point to try to refute evolution, show the weaknesses in it, in order to encourage people to take a more spiritual approach to life, and not necessarily just independent hater on evolution. And thanks again to Joanna coming on. I kept her here for 3.5 hours. So like this is
Yay!
on this
We made it.
topic, and I said like I encourage her to like Doooovid's a seasoned e-debater, and I guess Joanna has some experience in debate. But I was encouraging her. Like honestly, I thought she was going to be the replacement with Jennifer. Like I don't know how it worked out, but like I would not be like if you stepped into the arena and debated, like obviously she's
I
an
could never
intelligent woman. She's a
replace
tough.
Jen.
Well, I mean, you would have been the pro evolution. You would have been debating against her,
Yeah.
but and stuff like that could be arranged. So I look at debate as similar to chess. There's a lot like preparation and thinking in advance, and like studying lines and variation, and saying like the evidence. It's kind of like like prep and variation, and thinking through, and then sometimes like you lose and you have to like try a new opening, and so that's I think debate makes people better people. They make it doesn't have to be personal. I had no intention to like make Joanna look stupid or prove that she's wrong. In the thing, these are obviously highly debated issues because there's a lot of uncertainty, and you have to function with like in a school of thought due to
Doovid
the
is. I'm sorry,
uncertainty.
excuse me. I just read your chat. Doovid is not twice my age. Okay, we're very close in age.
Well, Doovid is 45, but that's twice your age, but it doesn't matter. Like we met playing chess, and she's a proactive person, and debate is really a more younger thing. So like debate is more a juvenile activity. Although I
Don't
enjoy debate,
don't
and
argue with people half my age.
yeah,
We're
are
so-
you? No, I mean, I'd debate anybody, but I mean, like Joanna has a background; she's thought about the topic, and actually, like I would collaborate and work with Joanna on further things, even like a chess book, like just
yeah,
full
that'd be
public
great.
disclosure. Joanna, like edited and went over my last essay on chess, and I'm sure that we could probably collaborate on like I mean, I'm sort of write a book or something, but like certain like we could probably like work together, coaching chess or like doing various things, even though we disagree about evolution. Um, and so I'm glad you came on, and Yeah, I put the link in the chat. We've been going so long, so I'm not sure if there's any
That was
guests. I
great.
didn't
And
really feel
um,
interactive. So
I'd
at
love
least
to do
we've
this
gone.
actually again, maybe in a more specific topic. We can nail down a specific topic. I feel like this was too broad and we were bouncing all over the place without much of a resolution. But I spent 4 years studying biology formally. I would love to get into a specific topic. Maybe we can be more descriptive than just
Well, we can even
evolution or
talk. I don't know
specific
if
topic.
like I wouldn't mind having a regular debate program. Anyone who watches this and wants to enter the arena, or if Joanna sometime over the next few weeks or months wants to do a part two,
Yeah,
and
I'd love
like
to.
like I'm also trying, like I do this to, I was encouraging Joanna even to do this, to be proactive. Like, okay, I'm grown up and I work, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the stuff that I think and study about. So like, okay, like I would like to write, but just making the PowerPoint and thinking this through. So the debate was kind of the incentive for me to research and think, and then write about it. And then
Isn't,
Joanna told me about like arguments and things. I'll have to
yeah.
look and think more about it.
Isn't
So
that a
just
joy? Learning. Like I want to do this more with you. I'm sorry, but yeah, just an excuse to learn and dive into something intellectually.
yeah, so that's what I encouraged, and even like make PowerPoints or write articles, and saying like a lot of debate is like repetitive and repeating the same points. So I'd like to avoid that and use debate as a venue to keep my mind fresh and learning, and to not be narrowcasted, because a lot of streamers, they only talk to people that agree with them. And to large point, like universities, the one time where you're in an environment with like all these different people and diverse, I mean maybe that's changing, but like diversified ways of view. And then like, okay, like after, if you get a job, or build up a family, move into a neighborhood, you tend to narrowcast with basically the people who agree with you. So but that's bad for intellectual growth. So you could use something like YouTube to have these intellectual spheres where you have, I also like to, so this was pretty friendly, and have respectful, friendly conversations with people of different point of view.
I love that. Yeah, I think we should do this again. And I'm down for chess.
I
Um,
stopped playing chess. Like, I mean, I'm coaching chess, so
like
like,
chess
yeah,
coach.
like,
I mean, like a stream or some sort of creating some sort of content, collaborating on that.
well, yeah, and because my interest now is more developmental psychology and coaching. So I coach mostly youth. Like, hey, okay, like, I'm a middle-aged man. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, competing at chess, like, it's a little bit of fun or intellectual exercise. But I even think like, chess is largely a kid's game. But I coach chess.
Offense taken.
I coach chess largely as a method to give back. Saying like, like
That's
I
cool.
could ramble about evolution or spirituality to the
Yeah.
next generation, and they don't really care. I mean, a handful of people do. That's what I have my YouTube for. But yeah, I'm a pretty good chess player. I was a former Michigan State junior champ. I'm still a 2,000 rated player, and in terms of youth coaching, I think I'm a pretty good coach, and I've thought through, and you're pretty successful. So like in Detroit. Um, I think I'm a pretty value chess coach, and I have a lot of students, top students that perform well and work together with Coach Fight and other people. But like, my specific interest is more related to some of the topics we covered today, which
Mhm.
is cognitive development, and also in terms of like,
Consciousness. I know you love.
well, I'm also like, me and Joanna would strongly differ, because like I'm a chess preacher, where like I like using chess as a way. You don't. I'm sure she does
And I'm
that
a
also.
player.
But I'm saying as a way um, to be like a life coach to youth and help them make better decisions. And I
Mhm.
might phrase that in spiritual terms, but it's not necessary. You're just saying that chess is a metaphorical, symbolic game, and it's conducive to life lessons.
It
And
is
so
absolutely forethought, learning how to win or lose,
a
learning
lot of
when
the
you're
top
safe
chess
to
players
prevent.
are atheists and use it for the same purpose. It's just the phraseology that your religious person might use would be different than atheistic chess coach. However, the lessons are largely the same, because chess is the game of action reaction. Even like Joanna, saying like, just because she's an evolutionist, she doesn't believe you could just do whatever you want and get away with it. There is such a thing as action reaction, and chess is like the method to teach kids to think and plan ahead, and to think in terms of action reaction, and from the other person's perspective. But yeah, so you could see collaborations on that. Maybe we'll even like in a month or even a few weeks, we could put together a stream on chess coaching.
Yeah, that would be great. Would you play? Would you play with me then?
Well, we could play a few games, but no, I mean, I think like
Crazy House.
we could play a few games, but no, I think it's more. I'm more focusing on cognitive development and other things. So like the playing is not necessary. So I play youth and I coach because you know I reached about 2,000 in my youth and stopped playing or studying. That's sufficient to teach youth, but there may not be too much utility in us playing. Um, that's not necessarily my interest. Like I said, that to me, chess is just a game. It's a
Mhm.
method to give back, and it's a good method for the study of mind, mental process, decision making, consciousness. Like I've written some of my essays. Chess historically has been so the Drosphalia of cognitive science, cognitive research, because chess is simple enough uh, to study cognitive processes, expertise, levels of understanding, cognitive development, and so that's more my specific interest. So
Yeah,
Joanna
this is
wanted to
all stuff I
collaborate
can
on that.
agree with you on. We should definitely hit this next. I think we would be on the same page a lot with the neurological benefits, mental benefits, social benefits. There's a lot of amazing things that chess can offer, and not just a fun, competitive kill you sport.
Okay, so I'm going to add Joanna as a moderator on my channel. So be in touch. So anyone, like usual, I'll try to in the next few days make a timestamp for the viewers where I will timestamp definitely like the beginning of the introduction so people could just click in the description to go to the relevant parts. And I tried to make this because our first time talking is such a wide subject. We probably bounced back and forth, which
Yeah,
is why most debates are hard to follow and not
organized.
that beneficial. But I'll do my best to timestamp it because it's 4 hours of people just want to get to relevant parts that
Sure.
interest them. So have a great night, and God
Thank
bless
you.
you, Joanna, for coming on. I thought this was pleasant, intellectual, learning conversation. So hope people enjoy. You could comment, and I put your Twitch. I don't know if you have any other contact information you want to share, but I put your Twitch in the description. So if anyone wants
Great.
to follow Joanna, you could follow her on Twitch, which is in the description.
Awesome. I will do the same with my chat on your channel. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun. And yeah, it was kind of all over the place, but it's our first go. I think I'm excited and I want to do more with you, and I think we can do better. But you're a great opponent. You're friendly. I have no issue. I don't feel comfortable discussing this with you or opposing ideas. So I think we
Well,
can
I'm
do
trying to recruit
great
you into the
stuff.
circuit, so
I don't
we'll
know
see.
about that. I don't have an issue with talking with you, but
You don't have to, but we'll see that. Should you want to, put yourself out there for debates, I will encourage you. But I'm happy just to have you as a guest on my channel, whether you do that or not.
wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this. I had fun and hope to do it again.
Okay, great. Have a great night, everyone.